Peace, family. It's your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to Office Hours. Every night here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, we hold night school Monday to Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And in night school, we do something interesting. We try to have intellectual conversations, deep dives on the most urgent topics, the most controversial subjects, the most engaging subjects in the world today. We try to avoid the cable news, superficial analysis, the drive-by talking points, because that doesn't get us anywhere. But on the weekend, we try to extend beyond night school even and hold office hours. Office hours is the time where we sit down with a singular person or people for an even deeper dive. The idea is to be able to go down to the core of an issue or set of issues. The idea is to ask interesting, provocative, challenging questions to intellectual leaders, to thought leaders, sometimes to activists, sometimes to journalists, but to people who can help us understand the world a little bit differently. Tonight, we're going to do the same thing. One difference, maybe a little bit, is that on office hours, we have not yet had someone who has such a sharp ideological disagreement with me as we're going to have tonight. We do it in night school all the time. You know, we've had a wide range of people, and it's always been interesting and fun and engaging. And I think everyone learns from it. But tonight, we're going to do it in office hours. I got an email, or no, not an email. I got a tweet from this gentleman in the spring. And in fact, let me bring him on so we can have the conversation ourselves. I don't want to represent him. He can represent himself. Eyal Yakoby is a pro-Israel activist. He is a self-identified, how would you call it, anti-Semitism activist. What's the proper way to say that? Like someone who's an activist fighting anti-Semitism. Is there like a?
I say it facetiously, but I say I'm an anti-Semite.
Okay. Okay. I was like, that feels like intuitively that makes sense, but it's not great for the bumper sticker or the business card. But you were a undergraduate student at the University of Pennsylvania. You were one of the most prominent voices in the country, honestly, while these things were happening. You've since, of course, graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. You are a graduate student now incoming at the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, MIT. So you will have been at two of the four schools that were grilled by the U.S. Congress on anti-Semitism. Maybe you'll do your doctoral work at Harvard or something like that, just to keep the pattern going. But you're somebody who I initially engaged because you reached out to me on Twitter, and if I remember correctly, your sense was that I was only debating tomato cans, that I was debating sort of weak opponents and framing it as if I were debating tougher opponents than I was. I of course disagreed with you. I think I've debated everyone from Alan Dershowitz to heads of state to leading social scientists and political scientists in particular, on historians, etc. on the subject, Israeli generals, etc. But I do think it's important.
Not to add a new debate into our whole medley of debates that will be happening. I never said you hadn't debated, intellectual thought leaders.
Yeah.
Obviously, Alan Dershowitz is probably the most prominent thought leader on the topic of Israel and anti-Semitism. I was saying specifically on the topic of what was unfolding on college campuses, that there's a difference between living through what was my senior year versus an outside person reading about and trying to get different bits of information was much different. That's
a fair point. I mean, I think some of the scholars I was debating from Columbia and MIT, or not MIT, Harvard, etc., were professors at those campuses, and they were living through it as well. But I think the student experience is certainly worth noting and certainly worth having on. That's why I wanted to talk to you. I was excited to talk to you. And then more recently, I think our engagement started. Let me pull it up so that people can see it. This is how we got there. And I said, no, we need to talk about this. And then the world just caught on fire, and we didn't have an opportunity to talk as quickly as I think either of us would have liked. But this tweet went up by Neil Berg. I don't know if you all can see it, but this tweet came up and it said this, and it went viral, and it goes viral every once in a while. It says the most famous quote unquote Palestinian was an Egyptian born in Cairo, and of course the word Palestinian here was used in quotes to suggest, and I think Neo would agree with me here. In fact, I'm sure Neo would agree with me here, based on subsequent exchanges, that Palestinian was not a legitimate identity of Yasser Arafat, and that he was Egyptian. Lots of people responded in lots of ways. I said, for anyone who cares about facts, Arafat was not Egyptian, he was Palestinian. And you said, yeah, so that's not true. And as evidence, you pointed to the Wikipedia page here that said born August 29th, 1929 in Cairo, Egypt. And so we said we'd talk about it, and we scheduled time to debate. Obviously, some people agree with you immediately. How do you debate where someone was born? And so I said, well, you know what? This will be a good opportunity. We've been meaning to talk anyway. Let's have that conversation as part of a broader conversation that we can have. And I'd like to have that with you tonight. You know, about Zionism, about we can start with Arafat, but then of course, since we had that exchange, I don't know if you heard, there was a big election here in the States. Donald Trump might be president again. There's been incredible violence around the world. We've seen more bombings and more not just strife, but extraordinary violence and devastation in Lebanon. We're on day 400 or now 401 in Gaza. And so there's lots of stuff to cover. And obviously we can't cover all of it. And of course, there's the campuses, which is really the thing that I wanted to talk to you about outside of this Arafat thing. Because you have a perspective that you want to share, and I'd love to hear about it and to situate that within a broader conversation about anti-Semitism, about free speech, about all the things that we fight about on college campuses and fight for on college campuses. So let's start maybe with the Arafat thing. I'll tell you my position. I fundamentally disagree with the premise. And again, I'll pull it up one more time here. I fundamentally disagree with the premise here, which is that, and I'm not saying this is your premise, but this is certainly Neil's premise, is that Arafat was not a Palestinian when he was born, that he was an Egyptian. And she negates entirely the very identity of the Palestinian. She's not just saying that he wasn't Palestinian. She puts Palestinian in quotes to suggest that it wasn't real and that it's not real, which I always find to be a fascinating way to think about identity, a fascinating way to think about national identity, fascinating way to think about collectives in general. So help me understand your take. And I said he was Palestinian. You said that's not true. Help me understand what you mean.
Yeah, my argument's very simple. I think Arafat was born an Egyptian, lived as an Egyptian, and died as a Palestinian. And I disagree with the tweet saying that Palestinians aren't a national identity, but I think they're a national identity now. Whereas I think, or actually I know that prior to the establishment of Israel, in fact, prior to 1964, when the PLO was established, there was no Palestinian identity present at the time. And I'm very interested to hear, especially when Arafat was born, what sort of documents or evidence you can provide to say that he self-identified as a Palestinian, not as an Egyptian.
So let's start with the initial claim, right? You said that prior to you said 67?
64.
64. Oh, but not you said the founding of the PLO. I'm sorry. There was no Palestinian. So you're saying no Palestinians identified as Palestinian, or no people identified as Palestinian prior to 1967?
You saw an emergence, specifically around 1930s, of a national Palestinian identity, but it was never tied to any sort of culture or linguistic unity. It was always tied to the eradication of the Jewish state, of the state of Israel. And the term Palestine itself is actually a colonial term. And when you look at the term Palestine, it was really only used twice. It was used at the end of Jewish sovereignty when the Romans put the name onto the land in a colonial way. And then when Jewish sovereignty was reestablished in 1948, and even the precursor, because there was obviously, after the Balfour Declaration, people predicted that there would eventually be an Israel. And that's when Palestine was used again. But just like in the case of Ceylon, which became Sri Lanka, or Rhodesia, is when the native inhabitants reclaim their land, they name it after the native name. And you see these examples, I think, best in things such as the Palestine Post, which is today the Jerusalem Post, or you look at the Palestine national soccer team, and you go through the roster, and all of the last names are Goldberg and Moskowitz. And I think example after example, prior to 1948, it was never understood, the region, the British Mandate of Palestine, as being a Muslim or Arab culture. It was simply the name, the colonial name, in fact, which was imposed by the Romans.
So you said a few things there. A couple of things. You mentioned a minor point, but I think worth mentioning. The Balfour Declaration, I would argue, doesn't predict in Israel, or does not foreshadow in Israel as it's constructed, as it is now. Balfour Declaration is about the creation of a Jewish national home. The idea of an actual of a Jewish state, and certainly a Jewish ethno state, is not part of the Balfour Declaration at all. In fact, one of the provisions of the Balfour Declaration, which is a very short document, as you know, I think it's 67 words, is that that nothing would happen to infringe upon the civil or religious rights of the population that's already there, which actually runs counter to the formation of the Jewish state as such. So I would argue that.
How does that?
What's that?
How does the current form of Israel denigrate or subjugate, in any legal sense, the Muslims and Christians who live there?
Well, remember, and I'm happy to answer this, but then I want to finish my stream of thoughts so I don't get too far away. A couple of things. One, the formation of the state itself, I think, is all credible historians would argue at this point, and certainly even leading Israeli historians argue that transfer was a fundamental and unavoidable part of the formation of the Jewish state. That the early Yishuv could only become the nation state of Israel through transfer. Transfer is expulsion. 750,000 people being expelled. I don't think there's any credible argument for saying that the expulsion of 750,000 people is not an infringement upon their civil and religious rights. The right, even the right to return home, the right to safety, the right to citizenship, were all denied based on the desire to form this particular state. And in the context of Israel-Palestine now, I think it would be pretty difficult to make a case that a Jewish state has no impact on the religious or civil rights of the indigenous population. To give you, we could look at everything from admissions committees in the Galilee. We could look at marriage. And you may say it's no big deal to have to go to Cyprus to get married, but that's certainly an example of
that doesn't discriminate against. So how the marriage laws work in Israel.
So
if you want to finish your thought, I can go back to marriage laws if you want in Israel.
Sure. I mean, we're again, this was a minor. I mean, I'm happy to stay here, but I wanted to get to the bigger point you were making. This was just a minor point. I didn't expect this much interruption. At this point, let me, if you don't mind, allow me to respond to the points you made uninterrupted, and then you can. And I don't mind being interrupted, but I mean, I just want to at least make the argument first, and there'll be times where we're going to have to interrupt each other or pause each other, but I just want to make the argument first. I think the bigger point here, in fact, let me jump to the bigger point so that we don't stay in the minutiae. But again, feel free to return to this if you want. The idea of this began by saying that there was no substantive Palestinian national identity prior to 1964.
Sorry, that's not what I was saying.
No, that's where you started, and then afterward, you went, and I think quite credibly, you clarified and moved backwards, right? You started to talk about as early as the 1930s, there being the kind of, if I'm understanding you correctly, that beginning in the 1930s, now you're saying that there was a kind of seedbed for the formation of a Palestinian national identity, but that national identity itself is still predicated upon, was predicated upon the kind of resistance to the formation of the Jewish state. Is that an accurate? Am I accurately capturing what you were saying? Or if not, let me know.
I would say to an extent. I definitely wouldn't say, and I would never demonize the Palestinian people so much to say that their entire national identity is predicated on the destruction of the Jewish state. However, I would say modern day, I think there is a national Palestinian identity, but the PLO and the formation of the PLO is really what set that through. And the PLO obviously was set up by people like Arafat, but in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, there was no Palestinian national identity as so much as to until we annihilate Israel. And I don't want to go too long because I do want to hear your broader point. But if you do read even the PLO chapter, they write frequently how their identity, the resistance movement will die once Israel dies. And I don't view that as a national identity in any regards.
You mean you're talking about the charter?
The what? Sorry?
You talking about the PLO charter?
The charter and even the writings by others. If we're talking about the Arab High Commission as well, it was always about making a greater Syria, a greater Lebanon, a greater Egypt, a greater Jordan. It was never about an independent state of Palestine. So
all right. So let's maybe use that as a point of engagement. I think one, the PLO isn't the starting point of the Palestinian national identity. That's just not true. Even in the way that I understand you're saying that with some level of a little more nuance than I'm flatly saying it right now. I'm saying that's at the core not true. Palestinians identified as Palestinian decades before then. And it wasn't just a kind of tangential identity or tangential project. I mean, you could go to the early part of the 20th century, decades before Arafat was born. Arafat was born in 1929. And there were magazines, newspapers, art, all created around this identity of being Palestinian. And so it'd be very difficult to me if they say, hey, let's start the Palestinian National Dance Troupe, or let's start the Palestinian newspaper. And this isn't just like we're in Palestine and so we're going to call it that, because there was a time, as you might know, I would imagine you would know, that when people talk about being Palestinian, they're actually talking about being Jewish, right? And so it's not always been an Arab national identity. There were times when people, when they were saying the Palestinians, they were talking about something different. But as early as the beginning of the 20th century, and even I would argue the late 19th century, there were people saying we are Palestinian. Do you disagree with that?
I fundamentally disagree.
So, just as an example, I'm just curious, on what basis do you disagree with that?
For instance, right, great example. You mentioned newspapers and magazines, that we didn't just set up a newspaper. The Palestine Post, the largest newspaper at the time, became the Jerusalem Post. The national soccer team was run by Jews. It was never understood as we are Palestinians in terms of a national identity. It was a colonial name imposed by the Romans on the region itself. and the inhabitants of the region, who were very few in numbers because malaria was really killing off most people there, they would identify based off of their ethnoclass. So the Jews would identify as Jews, the Arabs would identify, the Muslims would identify as Arab, and the Bedouin obviously moved around, whether it be within modern day Israel to Syria, to Iraq, to Saudi Arabia. But in terms of a national unity of varying parties, that just simply never existed.
Right, but I'm asking for evidence of it. I asked for the evidence that never existed, and you're saying the evidence is that it never existed. I mean, what I'm saying is I can produce. I can show you evidence that it did, and I'm saying
provide evidence of nothing existing. That's a like.
No,
I can't provide evidence.
Well, no. I mean, there would be scholars. There would be scholars who would have traced. I mean, because it's such a there's a claim being made by Palestinians that we've been calling ourselves Palestinian for a long time, and then there's historical records that show that. And I'm just curious to know on what basis you're disputing those records.
Well, I'm giving examples. So, for instance, the national team, the soccer team, was Jews. The Palestine Post is the Jerusalem Post today.
No, I get that. Those are examples of, and again, it's interesting because when I said that there was a time when people were talking about Palestine, they were talking about Jews. You shook your head no, but then you're actually proving that point when you talk about the Palestine Post. But what about, for example, again, those cases, those examples make a claim about how the early Zionist movement self-identified, and I'm not disputing that. Again,
the early Zionist movement identified as Israelites, and as I mentioned when I opened, places like Sri Lanka were called Ceylon. There were institutions that were called Ceylon, but that was still a colonialist name that they just took because it was the name of the region. It was the British Mandate of Palestine.
Right. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. And anyway, I feel like we're arguing over like absolutist claims. I guess a question I have for you is, what would you, in terms of borders, what would you claim as being Palestinian? What like?
Well, before we go to borders, because that's I think that's outside the bounds of the case I'm making right now. I'm happy to answer that, but yeah. But just again, I was trying to pull this up to show you. Here's an example of Philistine newspaper.
Yep.
This was a newspaper created by Palestinians.
Yep.
What you would call Arabs. In 1911.
Yep.
In 1911, they were identifying themselves as Palestinians.
How were they identifying themselves as Palestinians in terms of a national identity versus simply calling their newspaper after the colonialist name, which was imposed?
That's what I'm proceeding to say. In the newspaper, and this newspaper ran from 1911 until the start of the Arab revolts, and this newspaper was expressly designed or created by by Palestinian Christians for the purpose of resisting the Zionist movement, and highlighting their and fomenting a collective identity as Palestinian as a response to this growing a movement of settlers who were coming in. I don't think it would be very difficult, I think, to read these archives, which I have. I've read not every issue, but I've read most of these issues. It'd be very difficult to read this and not see this as a nationalist newspaper. I mean, that was literally the point of it. That was literally the point of the newspaper. So how do you account for this newspaper existing and and that's why I asked for your counter evidence. Obviously, it's hard to. I agree. You can't show nothing, right? But I'm saying here's something. How do you counter this claim of something existing? You know what I mean? Unless there's some reason to discount this or to dispute this. I mean, this isn't a secret newspaper. It was one of the more prominent newspapers in the Middle East at that point. Even though the circulation wasn't crazy great, it was still pretty strong. So how do you account for a nationalist newspaper existing called Palestine and them calling themselves Palestini, back then if this didn't exist. And this was 1911 again. This is 1911. How do you account for that?
Again, just because a region is called a certain name, which is a colonialist name in this context, doesn't prove that there's nationalist identity.
No, but that's not what I said. What you just said is true.
Well, I'm finishing my point. Okay. And even what you said, right? You're saying Jews also identified as Palestinian, which again, I disagree with. That's
not what I said. That's not what I said.
You said there was a time where Jews self-identified as Palestinian, no?
No, I said there was a time when when they said that that's what they were talking about. I was really thinking about the West and sort of how they talked about Palestine. They weren't thinking about Arabs, is what I'm saying.
Okay. So I guess that's a moot point then. I don't.
But back to the actual question, right? If these people were saying they're in this paper in 1911, they're saying we're Palestinian, and they're saying it's a nationalist movement that they're fomenting in 1911. Is it possible that there was more of a Palestinian national identity in the early part of the 20th century than you've initially acknowledged?
No, because I don't think a nationalist identity has to do with ridding the region of Jews. I don't think that constitutes a national identity. I don't think that's cultural. I don't think that has to do with food or linguistic differences. I think creating artificially a national identity to counter Jews emigrating back to their homeland doesn't constitute a national identity more than me just writing in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal right now that I'm starting a national identity.
What makes it a national identity now?
What makes it a national identity now?
What makes it? You said you acknowledge Palestinian being a legitimate national identity in the 1960s. What's different? And you said
because now I think there's number one, UNRWA, which I fundamentally disagree with. I think there's no reason that people like Bella Hadid are considered refugees who live in LA in $1 million mansions. But UNRWA has a very specific definition of what it means to constitute a Palestinian. There's a very clear outline of what a Palestinian identifies as, and it's self-described and it's created. And back in the day, and you're bringing up that example, I mean, I can literally give you a quote from a Palestinian nationalist on the Arab Higher Committee said before the Peel Commission in 1937, which they rejected because it included Jews living in the land, quote, "There is no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. Palestine is a part of Syria." And so as much as I think you can,
why does that claim nullify? Why does that claim nullify all the other evidence to the contrary? Why do you find that claim more compelling or persuasive than newspapers, theaters, art, language, and artifacts that demonstrate people articulating a national identity?
Well, I think language is actually a great point. Is the Arabs living in the British Mandate of Palestine had no difference in terms of their dialect than Syria did at the time. And even when the Romans established the region of Palestine, number one, was to make fun of the Jews because the Philistines conquered the Jews. The whole point was mocking Jews. It was a colonialist term put. And they called it Palestina, Syria. It was part of it. And if you read what the members of the PLO said, it was all about, including Arafat, it was all about ridding the Jewish state. And then they planned on joining the broader Arab ecosystem. And that's what I asked in terms of borders, because I think it's very important if you have a national identity to establish what your borders are, what constitutes our national identity. Because I can write that I have a national identity, but if it's not pegged
down. Wait a minute. So are Jews in LA? Are Jews in LA Jews? Are they part of the same national? Do they should say national identity as Jews in Syria?
Are Jews in LA part of the same national identity as Syria?
Jews is a supranational identity, right? Jews everywhere in the world are Jews, right?
Yeah, because Judaism is a religion where you follow a common belief system. So,
but it's also a national identity. It's not just a religion.
It's an ethnicity.
Right. But wait, yes or no? Is Judaism a national identity? Is Jew a national identity as well?
I think that's a much longer conversation. I think you could make that argument. I think you could also.
Would you make that argument? Yeah. Is it a national identity? If it's not, it's not. I'm not. I don't have any.
Yes, Jew is a national identity in a sense. Yes.
And what are the borders of that national identity?
What are the borders of
Jewish national identity?
I mean, there's historic greater
the whole
Israel,
world, right?
What?
You would say it's the whole globe. It's everybody. Every Jew in the world is shares the same national identity, right?
What are the borders of the Jewish national identity?
You said there are no borders. My point is, you're saying if I understand,
No, there's definitely borders. It's the greater Israel. There's definitely historic borders for what the Jewish national identity is. Don't get me wrong.
Right. So but a Jew who's never lived there, who's never been tied to there physically or even if I convert, I'm still part of the same national identity. There's no geographic, there's no correlation between my access to this national identity and my location geographically. It's a national identity.
Maybe you're getting me confused. I'm saying that no matter if you're a convert, you live in LA, you live in the UK, you live in Israel, you live in Japan, if you're a Jew, your national identity is tied to the greater Israel, which is very clearly defined in the religion. That's where religion plays into it.
And greater Israel is what?
I mean, the greater Israel includes a vast swath of land, which no one.
Tell me, but it's concrete. It's not nebulous. It's concrete. What is greater Israel? Do
you want me to draw out the borders? It goes. I would say.
Tell me. I'm not being pedantic. I'm saying, like, give me in general terms what is a border? What's the land?
I mean, it's a landmass in the Middle East. It's slightly north of Israel. It's west. It's
does it include modern day Lebanon?
I think it includes some of.
Hold on. I'm sorry. If you're not sure, it's okay to say you're not sure. It's not this isn't a high stakes test. If you're not sure, we can return to it.
No. We're talking about an ancient region. Just like if you asked me what are the borders of the Babylonians, I also would not be able to draw exact borders.
Right, but
encompass some of north of
right, but I'm not asking you to draw. And again, if there were a high stakes political debate over the borders of modern day Babylon, we would have to know the answer. So I'm just curious to know, in general terms, does it include Syria? Does it include Lebanon? Does it include Jordan? Does it include Saudi Arabia? Does it include Iraq? Like what?
Yes, yeah. The borders extend that. And if we were talking about a high political
debate, extend what?
Couldn't draw out the exact borders of any sort of.
I'm not asking you to draw you're making a straw man. I'm not asking you to draw the exact borders. I'm asking in general terms what modern day countries does it intersect with. That's all I'm asking.
It's northwestern Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, southern Lebanon, Jordan, and I think parts of the Sinai Peninsula.
So for you, greater Israel, so basically Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, southern Lebanon, and Jordan are all actually Israel.
No. I'm not getting hooked to what I would want Israel to be.
No. I mean in terms of greater Israel historically.
Those are the defined borders that as written in biblical text.
So when you say defined borders, because Israel does not have defined borders right now.
Modern day Israel definitely has defined borders.
What are the defined borders of Israel right now?
I would say the blue line.
You'd say what does the international community say?
I personally believe in a nation's sovereignty that can define their own borders, and I would say that is.
So wait a minute. A nation can define its. So if right now the United States said our borders are actually Canada and Mexico, then it's just ours.
I think that's just a hyperbole to say.
It's not hyperbole. It's a hypothetical. I'm asking you. You said
it's not hypothetical. We don't have to talk about Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. We're talking about Israel.
Okay. If Israel right now said we want all of Lebanon, we're going to define our own borders as being all of Lebanon and all of Jordan, then you have a right to do that?
No, but you're saying what does the international community say, and I'm saying it's irrelevant because I don't.
Right. So I'm taking that off the table. I'm conceding. I'm accepting your stipulation that you don't believe that the international community should ever say that a nation itself has a right to define its own borders. And I'm saying, what happened?
With historical context, wars fought, land won, agreements written. Yeah.
No. What are the criteria for a nation being able to define its own borders? Be specific, because that's I'm sure you can imagine it's a pretty provocative claim.
I don't think it's a provocative claim. Israel won.
A nation can define its own borders, whatever a nation wants it to be.
Yes, if there's peace treaties and there's wars that are won and lost by certain.
No. It's the if that I'm asking you to explain. Otherwise, let me explain to you why I'm asking you this.
Yeah.
What people are hearing is if you just say a nation can define its own borders, that sounds like whatever we want we can just take. And I'm not saying you're saying that. You're saying that there are contingencies and conditions upon on which the right to define one's borders rests. I'm asking you to explain what those are.
I'm sure there's some sort of legal international definition. You asked me what Israel's border.
No. Hold on. Let me pause you. There's not, because the international, the law you're appealing to says that the international community defines it. You're saying you can't simultaneously reject the international legal community and international law standard on defining borders and then say, well, I'm sure there's an international law about defining borders. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, I'm saying I'm sure there is one.
But you're rejecting that. You're saying that's not legitimate.
I'm saying that you asked me, what do I define as modern day Israel's borders? I said the blue line up to the Golan. Then you interjected saying, who says that? I said Israel. You said the international community disagrees. And I go, I think Israel can establish its own borders. That was the entire stipulation. And I don't think any of this has any relevancy to whether or not Yasser Arafat was a Palestinian or not.
No, it absolutely does, because part of how you're defining that, this comes down to how we define a national identity. Is it by borders? Is it by land? Is it by the formation of a nation state? These are the very things that make it that. So, yeah. Because if we, let me ask you, have you read any biographies, any work on Yasser Arafat or his family?
Yes.
Okay, so his family identified as Palestinian.
Some of them, not all of them. I think his mother was Egyptian.
His
mother had family in
both
Jerusalem.
His parents were Palestinian.
Then maybe it was one of his grandparents. I may be mistaken then.
Okay. So he has Egyptian, and his parents were born in Jerusalem.
Sure.
And you know that his family name is. Do you know his family name?
Sorry, you broke up. What'd you say?
Do you know what his family name is?
No, I don't.
Okay. It's Husseini.
Okay.
Do you know who the Husseinis were?
People before the British Mandate of Palestine was created.
I don't follow.
I just don't. I don't think you quizzing me on the name of Arafat.
No, I'm not quizzing you. You asked me to return. You asked me to return. You asked me to move away from the defining borders thing and go back to Arafat. So I'm going back to Arafat and saying, and you said, and I asked before, so I wasn't going to ask you these questions if you hadn't read on his history, because I think that's pointless. But since you said you've read the biographical work on him, you understand. Because if you haven't read his biographical work, it's kind of hard to say he didn't identify as Palestinian if you don't actually have any way of knowing how. I mean, there are records that show how his family identified, and you said you read this stuff, so that's why I'm asking you this. So the Husseinis, just for the benefit of my audience, since if you don't know, the Husseinis were considered one of the notable families of Jerusalem. There's the Husseinis, there's the Nashashibis, there's the Khalidis. These are probably the three most significant Palestinian families that, you're right, did exist before the British Mandate. They existed well through the Ottoman Empire, right? And so the Husseinis, and he's a Husseini. Now, again, if you read the biographies of him, and as you say you have, because I would have thought you would have pushed back on this point. There's debates about the extent to which he's a Husseini, and I think that's a legitimate, like whether he's like did you see The Godfather 3?
Yes, I have.
Right. So it's kind of like what's my man when the cousin comes up and it's like, how much of a Corleone are you? You know what I mean? Like, what level of Corleone are you? You know, I think that's a legitimate question. I think it's a really interesting question.
I think I've read a lot of people's biographies, and typically they don't bring up the family name and specifically where that family came from, because people move around.
Middle East, hold on. You're saying in Middle East biographies they typically don't do that?
I would say it depends on the biography, but I would say that there was a huge rewriting of history after the PLO was established.
That's just not true. That's factually untrue.
Let me finish my point. I don't think we have to.
I'll move on, but it's factually untrue to say that an overwhelming, disproportionate, an infinitesimal amount of Middle Eastern biographies of the time don't focus on family names and where they. That's just not true. I'm telling you that.
I never said that. But regardless.
No, what did you say? I'm sorry. Clarify.
I said I've read many biographies
of the Middle East.
No, I have not read many biographies.
I'm only talking about the Middle East. For the Middle East, this issue is unique and specific. And in the Middle East, this is the key issue, and this is something that happens.
Yeah. But I'm saying a modern day written biography can put Palestinian because it was the national identity of Palestinian was created after, before.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about biographies that talk about how people identified at the time.
That's okay. We're talking about Yasser Arafat very specifically here. And
I'm saying in his biographies, they do this, the thing that I'm talking about.
And the reason I brought up borders is because, like we were saying about, you asked me about what do Jews define as their borders, and I said Greater Israel. That is a very specific border. That is a very specific border that is written down. Whereas with Arafat, the borders kept changing. In the 1964 PLO charter, it specifically said we don't consider the West Bank to be ours or Gaza. It very clearly outlines in the PLO charter that the Hashemite kingdom rules the West Bank and would not be part of Palestine, and Gaza would be ruled by the Egyptians.
Can I ask you one question about that?
Yeah, sure.
Why would the changing borders in 1964 be relevant to how his family identified in 1929? What were the changing borders at the time that he would be, at the time we're questioning, which is the early 1920s?
I'll go back to that point, but I'm just going to finish this line of argument. So then, after the Arabs lost the 1967 war, the PLO, and you can read this in the archives, that they were actually happy because now they could basically commandeer this movement and make it a Palestinian national identity. And that's why you see a revision in the PLO charter in 1968, which says, no, now we're including West Bank and Gaza. And throughout the entirety of the history, it was never pegged to creating a national identity for Palestinians. It was always created to eliminate the state of Israel. And it's been, honestly, a cancer for the Palestinian people to think.
Before we get into that, sure, fine. We can talk about that. But now back, how you said that defining identities, and we're talking about Arafat in particular, is difficult because of the constant changing borders. And you point 1964 to 1967. But again, we're talking about 1929. What borders were changing in 1929 that are relevant to what we're talking about?
What borders are changing in 1929? You mean after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, where basically every border in the Middle East was changing?
When did the Ottoman Empire fall?
At the end of World War I.
What year?
19. I don't know. I don't want to mess it up. Whatever you want.
It's fine. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. My point is, even if we just point to the start of Balfour in 1917, right?
Sure.
Right. 1917 to say 1947. Were there any changes in the border?
To the British Mandate of Palestine?
Yes.
When was Jordan established? If so, yes. I think 1946 Jordan was established. So yes, there was a change to it.
Okay, so let's say 1946. Let's use your date. You're wrong, but let's say your date is right. Let's say it's 1946. Right? I'll pretend you're right for a second. He was born in 1929. So how would that be relevant to his family self-identification in 1929? That doesn't make any sense.
I'm saying we're talking about a national identity being created. A national identity shouldn't change borders based off of where Israel exists. That is not a national identity. And if we're talking about borders changing, you can even see during the Ottoman Empire, before the fall of the Ottoman Empire, that they were changing the borders based off of Jewish immigration. They established these little.
Who was changing what? Just be specific.
The Ottomans in Turkey were changing the border. They had small consulates that were smaller land-defined areas, and Syria controlled most of it. They had Mount Lebanon, which controlled northern modern-day Israel.
What year are you talking about?
Sorry,
you talking about the start of the British Mandate?
No. I'm talking about the Ottoman. You're talking about after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Was there any changes for a 30-year period of time?
What year are you talking about? Before the start of the British Mandate?
Before the start of the British Mandate.
Okay, just for clarity's sake, just for clarity's sake, just for the audience, because I don't want the audience to think what you're saying is true. Turkey was not doing anything prior to the start of the British Mandate. Turkey was not established until 1922. The British Mandate for Palestine begins in 1970. Let me finish. Let me finish for the audience a second, and I'll let you respond. So Turkey wasn't doing anything during the time of the Ottoman Empire because Turkey was not established until after, right? Turkey was established after then. So that's literally just factually untrue. But
I don't know who mentioned Turkey.
You just did. You just literally said the
Ottoman Empire. I'm saying the Ottoman Empire before the fall of the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, so when you say Turkey, you misspoke. You just meant to say the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, I meant to say Istanbul.
Okay, so when you say, just again, because I don't want this to look like I'm being weird. You just said, I don't know who said Turkey. You said Turkey. That's why I responded. That's why I thought it was so strange that you.
Again, I think it's a moot point. We can move on. I should see that I misspoke. That's my apologies.
Okay, that's fine. Again, I just don't want this. Remember, this is called office hours, and so I don't want people are literally taking notes and studying. I don't want them to write down what you said as fact simply because you said it. Similarly, if I say something that's untrue, I want you to correct me so that the audience doesn't misunderstand. Let's move on to another topic, because I don't think we're going to agree on Arafat now. And with all due respect, I don't think you actually. I don't think we're going to get anywhere on this. You said something else that I thought was interesting, and that was about the changing goal of the PLO. Or do you want to say? I see you smiling. I don't want you to feel like I'm forcing you to move to change. Where do you want to go? I'll go wherever you want to go, because I don't want you to feel like I'm commandeering the conversation. We'll go wherever.
No. I'm just saying. I feel like during this entire conversation, it was all about the nitty gritty, irrelevant details. We have a broader movement.
That's what scholars do.
Wait, let me finish. We're talking about one of the most complex geopolitical situations, and nitpicking specific relevant, like, it's all irrelevant. There's a broader national identity. What a biography that is modern day written about someone after the national identity was created is irrelevant to the actual time period. So when I'm bringing up stuff like the Arab High Commission, what PLO nationalists were literally saying at the time, it's just, you shouldn't have any variation in terms of a national identity. There should be clear set borders.
Are there no variations among Jews among what the national identity is?
No, there's not. There's, as I mentioned, there's Greater Israel, which I couldn't draw out for you. I
didn't ask you to draw it out. What's written in the Bible. Again, I didn't ask you to draw it out. I asked you to give me a general picture, because I don't want you later on to say he got to nitpicky and he made me. He was asking me to draw the specific. I wasn't asking that at all. I was asking just what you gave me, which was like a general picture of which countries it intersected with. That was all. Yeah. And you gave it to me. I think that was a reasonable question.
Yeah.
To your point about the nitty gritty, yeah, when you're that's exactly what you have to get into when you're talking about one of the most complex issues in modern history, right? You have to get into the nitty gritty details. And when you bring up the Arab High Commission, that's no more or less nitty gritty than me bringing up a newspaper or me bringing up a piece of counter evidence. I think it's all nitty gritty. I just happen to be familiar with the nitty gritties that you're talking about. But I think what you're saying is interesting. And I think the claim, I disagree with your claim that there is this kind of unanimity among what constitutes Jewish national identity. I don't think any group, any community, any world has as much of a unanimous vision as you're suggesting they do. And I don't claim to speak for Jewish people. I'm saying that the Jewish people who have come out both on Zionist platforms, anti-Zionist platforms, because I don't want to bring out like Natori Karta and say, look, they look at the world different than you, because they're a very small part of global Jewry. But I'm saying mainstream Jews who are pro-Israel, pro-Zionist, there are different visions of what borders mean, what national identity means, what constitutes national identity. We did a 2-week interview a while back with someone who had a very different argument than you do. It's not for me to decide. I think Jews have a right to self-determination.
In terms of Judaism, there's a book, the Bible and the Talmud, which literally define the Jews' national identity homeland. It's literally written out for Jews. There's no variation. So if someone else did say there's a variation, they can just reference a book which literally has it for thousands of years of what the Jewish national identity. Now that changes in terms of what modern political context,
that's my point,
geopolitical issues. That's why, for instance, Israel gave up the Sinai for peace with Egypt. But in terms of a national identity, I mean, Jews have historic sites all across the Middle East. They just don't have control over it. And I think that honestly, a very good example is Nablus, which is native name is Shechem, which was changed in 1830 after it was conquered. So I'm saying names are constantly changing, but a name of a region is not a national identity. And in terms of a 30-year period, I just don't fundamentally think that an entire national identity pegged to the destruction of the Jewish state is in any sense a real national identity centered around culture, language.
Is there a distinct culture and language now, Palestine?
I think yes, definitely. There's more. What's the distinctive language? That's what I said. I said.
I know you said that. I'm asking to follow. What is the distinct language of Palestine now?
From my understanding, Palestinians do have a slightly different dialect of Arabic than other groups in Arab groups in the region.
You're saying the Palestinians in Jerusalem in 1920 didn't?
No, they didn't. They viewed themselves as Arab, as part of a broader pan-Arab unity.
Viewing themselves as pan-Arab is a different argument. I'm saying Jerusalemites right now speak a very similar dialect of Arabic that they spoke in 100 years ago. Would you agree with that? Or you don't agree with that, obviously?
I have not studied. I can't speak Arabic, so I haven't studied specific Arabic texts. But reading.
So on what basis are you saying that Palestinians that Palestinians now speak a different dialect that's sufficiently different to distinguish them as Palestinian and didn't 100 years ago? On what basis are you saying?
I'm saying that 100 years ago, Palestinians self-identified as Arabs. They did not self-identify as Palestinians. Today,
I understand the point you make. But you made a different claim. All right, let me put it differently. You made a claim about language, and I said, "Is there a distinct language now?" You said, "Yes, there wasn't before." Would you?
I said, from my understanding, the dialect of Arabic.
And I'm saying, where are you getting that understanding from?
Someone who studies Arabic wrote it, and I read it. Again, I think this is a nitty-gritty, irrelevant detail.
No, what I'm saying is, you're saying things that aren't true, and when I ask you for the basis of it, you say, "Well, it's no big deal." I think then maybe what we should do is, why don't we withdraw the language claim? Because what I'm saying is, as someone who speaks Arabic and someone who studied Palestinian Arabic for not 30 years, but since my math isn't good, I'm better at language than math, 25 years, I'm telling you that if you look at Jerusalemite, or what we call it Jerusalemite Arabic now, it's pretty consistent to what it was 100 years ago. And the distinction between that and, say, Syrian Arabic or Jordanian Arabic or Lebanese Arabic, it's not any different than it was 100 years ago. And you're saying it was, and I'm saying, and when I say, well, what are you basing that on? You say, well, I don't speak it, I don't know, this is irrelevant. But then you can't make the claim, and then when I challenge you,
I'm saying that we've spent probably a minute talking about my understanding of Arabic dialects, and again, I think it's very irrelevant.
We've been talking for 52 minutes. You think 1 minute is too much to talk about this? You made the claim. I asked you what made a thing a thing, and you said language. You pointed to language.
You asked me what a national identity is. I think language has to do with it. I think culture.
Yes, and what I'm saying, and so that would mean that Palestinians have to have you're saying that Palestinians didn't have that language. That language was not a formative part of Palestinian.
It's language not only in terms of how you speak it, but how you self-describe in terms of language, and it's a.
No, I get that, right? And so we started there, right? And I said, well, here's evidence of 100 years ago, them self-identifying as Palestinian 40 years before you claim they did, and you offered no rejoice.
I did. You brought up a newspaper in Arabic and described the newspaper. It was called Palestine something. It
was called Palestine.
It's called Palestine. Great. I refuted that by bringing up the fact that there was another newspaper also titled Palestine Post, which is now the Jerusalem Post.
But here's the difference. Here's the difference, and this is the part you're missing.
Okay.
I told you they didn't just say that. In the paper, they literally identified themselves as Palestinian.
And then you made also the argument that they identified as Palestinian in response to Jewish immigration into the land. I don't think a national identity has to do with kicking out another group of people.
No. But
you said that it was in response to Jewish immigration. You
said, but to your point, what you argued was Palestinian national identity has always been about that, but it just didn't start to the 60s.
No, again, I think today there is more of a national Palestinian identity.
Right, and when I said based on what, you said language.
You asked me what national identity constitutes, and I responded with.
Okay, so let me not speak in the abstract. What makes Palestinian national identity legitimate now, right now?
What makes Palestinian identity legitimate right now? Because I think that based off of agreements, you could argue, such as the Oslo Accords, that that Palestinians don't want to be part of a greater Arab.
When did the Oslo Accords come?
I'm saying that right now, that Palestinians want a state of their own. Whereas before, the Palestinians didn't want a state of their own. They wanted the end of the Jewish state and to be swept up into a pan-Arab unity. And that is what they said in their charter. The charter moves as Israel expands its borders. What sort of national identity changes what they want based off of what another country?
That's not what the PLO were asking.
Well, they definitely weren't asking. They were committing
none of what you just said is true, and I want to return to it just one second.
What specifically of what I just said is not true? I gave you a quote of.
Yeah, I'll tell you if you're asking.
Yeah.
the goal of the PLO in 1964 was to form a single state in the borders of what we call historic Palestine, right? It wasn't borderless. It was a very specific border. And after 1967, the goal was
no. Wait, repeat what you just said. That there was very defined borders for Palestine, and then 1967 happened.
No, you asked me what their goal was.
Yeah, what was their goal?
I just answered that, and then I didn't say that's what the borders were. I said that's what the goal was. So remember,
but wait, the goal was to establish a state in what borders of Palestine?
In what would now be called the West Bank of the Jordan River, Gaza, the Sinai, the Golan, and in what is now the state of Israel.
The Golan was included in this?
Yeah.
I don't think Palestinians have ever argued for the Golan. I mean, the Golan was conquered from Syria.
Not the entire. All right, let me pull up a map for you. I'm happy to pull up a map for you and show you, just so you can see what I mean. But while I'm pulling up the map, I don't want us to move off the point. I'm pulling up the map as we talk. I don't want to move off the point here, right? Which is, this is what we got so far off the topic. Your claim is that the Palestinians, if I'm understanding you correctly, that Palestinians' sole goal was to destroy Israel.
I'm saying based
in terms of nationalism. I don't mean in life. I mean in terms of the nationalist goal. The nationalism goal was hovering around ending the Jewish state. I think that claim, because I've let you say that a few times. I just want to respond to that for clarity's sake. The argument, and implicit in that, to be clear, also is that they only wanted those other areas in the 1967 war because the Jews got them. Is that fair to say?
That's precisely what I'm saying.
Yeah, I just want you to actually say it out loud.
Yeah.
Because again, for the audience's benefit, I knew what you were getting at, but you didn't actually say it.
Yeah.
So here's, and that claim's made a lot, and we've addressed that claim here on the show before, but the default position of the Arab world prior to the 1967 war, specifically between 1948 and 1967, was that all of the goal was that all of the land taken in the 1948 war would be returned to the Arabs, right? And so when it was under Jordanian occupation, so the idea was that the West Bank and Gaza in particular, when it was under Jordanian rule, let me take a step back, so because I feel like we're speaking inside baseball a little bit.
Yeah.
The dominant argument, not the dominant, a prominent argument among pro-Israel voices is that the Palestinians had no objection to Jordan occupying the West Bank and Gaza, and it's only after the 1967 war, when Israel got it, that suddenly they cared about the West Bank and Gaza being under occupation, because now it's under Israeli occupation. Am I capturing the argument fairly succinctly?
Yeah. Wait, do you mind if I just read the exact 1964 PLO charter? Because I think it is pretty.
Sure, I have it up too, but go ahead, read it.
I just had it up. You can finish your point if you're trying.
Okay, thank you. So when we that's the argument, but it's not that. To be clear, it's not that the Palestinians were okay with Jordan being being the occupiers of the West Bank and Gaza. The idea was that, and this wasn't just a position of the Palestinians. This wasn't just a position. This was the position of, honestly, almost the entire Arab world at this point. The position was that that the West Bank and Gaza would be returned to the Palestinians at some point. And I think that I think there's a legitimate argument to say that that was naive or short-sighted or wrong-headed in terms of strategy. I think there's a legitimate argument to say that wasn't going to happen. But it wasn't that they were okay with Jordan occupying it. It's that occupations are generally short. Occupations are temporary. You know, the current Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza has gone on. You know, it's the longest. The West Bank is the longest occupation in modern human history, and that wasn't the plan. After the 1960s.
So wait, just a question, just before I forget it. If the broader Arab world wanted a Palestinian state, why didn't between 1948 and 1967 did the Egyptians and the Jordanians not just say, here's a Palestinian state for you, please take the West Bank and Gaza?
Right, and that's the point. That's literally what I'm answering. But I'm saying that the assumption was that at some point that would happen, right? Because they weren't recognizing the existence of Israel at all, and so they thought that all of historic Palestine was going to be returned to the Arabs. That's the point I'm making, and I'm saying.
You were saying there was consensus among the broader Arab region.
That was the general consensus, yes, and that's not really a disputed position.
If that was the general consensus, why didn't they just give them a state? Why?
Because they didn't want a state that was reduced to the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. They wanted a state that, again, the assumption was that Israel won the war in 1948, and the state of Israel was created. The Arab world at that point was still not recognizing Israel as a state. The broader Arab world still thought that wasn't going to be a permanent solution. The broader world thought that wasn't the thing. If they had thought that, perhaps they would have created a state in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. And some would argue that would have been a better outcome because Israel was not going anywhere. But the argument at that point, the belief at that time was that Israel was going somewhere. That's my point.
It still doesn't make sense why they wouldn't give them some of their land back. Why would the Jordanians keep the entirety of the West Bank if they wanted a Palestinian state? Say, here's a Palestinian state.
Their assumption, the assumption was that all of this would be returned to the Arabs. Again, I understand your point in saying, hey, that wasn't the best strategy, right? But that's kind of a Monday morning quarterback vision when you now understand, particularly after the 67 war, that hey, this thing is permanent.
Okay, so let's just read the Article 24 of the PLO chapter in 1964. The organization, referencing the PLO, does not exercise any regional sovereignty over the West Bank and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, in the Gaza Strip, or the Hema area. That seems kind of bizarre, no?
That's exactly that's literally what I just said, though. How is that different than what I just said?
They're saying openly that they don't care about the West Bank or Gaza, so it's all pegged to one.
No. Hold on. That's not what they said. What they said is we don't exercise any regional sovereignty. Any regional sovereignty. What does sovereignty mean in international legal discourse?
Control.
Right. They're saying we don't have control over it. They didn't. The Jordanians did.
Then why in 1968 did they change their charter and say that they're wedded to capturing that land? Why wasn't it? Why did they have to change? Why exactly did they have to amend their charter to then include the West Bank, Gaza, if either way they didn't control it? Isn't that bizarre? Don't you think that's bizarre?
I literally just, prior to you reading that point, I literally just gave you the reason why.
What was the reason? That because Jordan and Egypt existed and controlled that land, and they thought that Israel was gonna cease to exist, that they amended. Who cares?
No, you're missing the point. Sincerely, hear what I'm saying. Article 24, because you missed your initial interpretation of Article 24 was inaccurate, right? Article 24 was simply saying we don't control the West Bank. We don't have any sovereignty over it. It didn't say it's not ours. It didn't say we don't want it. It said we don't exercise any sovereignty over it. And the reason why it wasn't a priority, to focus on those lands is because, again, there was the default presumption of the Arab world was that all of historic Palestine was going to be returned to them. And so the struggle, including Jordan and Egypt, Jordan and Egypt shared that vision. So there was no dissensus about those lands. So that wasn't a site of struggle. That wasn't a site of struggle. After the 1967 war, after the Golan gets captured from Syria, after the West Bank gets captured from Jordan, after the Sinai and Gaza get captured by Egypt, now suddenly they're saying, oh, wait a minute, the thing that we're fighting, what they were calling the Zionist entity, right, has now grown, and now all of these are sites of struggle for us in order to create a liberated Palestine. That's why. It's not like you may not agree with the strategy, but there's no logical inconsistency here. The idea was that after the 1967 war, we're fighting a bigger struggle. Jordan wasn't our enemy. They're saying
Jordan was occupying the land.
Yes,
Egypt was occupying the land. Why did they not want that land when they were occupying it?
Again, I'm going to say it one more time, and then we just have to agree to disagree.
Okay.
They did want you're saying, you're asking a question. You're sort of begging the question. I'm not saying, you're asking why they didn't want that land. I'm disputing your premise that they didn't want it. I'm saying all the evidence, not my thoughts, not my conjecture, written documents, spoken words, and just common sense says, of course they wanted their land. Of course they wanted the West Bank and Gaza. There's no reason to believe they didn't. Even Israeli scholars don't argue that they didn't want it. I mean, this is just it's a strange conversation now. But the point was, the default assumption of the Arab nations was that all of historic Palestine was going to be returned to them. And the West Bank, and if you ask Jordan, and if you look at what Jordan's agreement was even prior to 1948, they had already struck a deal. So there are so many reasons why the charter wouldn't focus on the West Bank and Gaza. But again, they didn't say we don't want the West Bank and Gaza. All they talked about was sovereignty at that time. The 1967 charter, quite reasonably, I think, had to adjust. I think everybody's land, everybody's logics and documents changed after the 1967 war because the international community changed. They changed their thoughts. And one of the things that happened after the 1967 war, and again, I'd love to know your thoughts on this, is that the West Bank and Gaza would be returned. Why haven't they been returned?
They said they would be returned. I'm forgetting the exact actual language that was used in the UN resolution, but it was very particular that if you're pulling it up, then it would be great.
I'll pull it up, but continue.
My understanding was very particular that it was once an agreement is made between the Israelis and Palestinians to define specific borders. I'm 99% sure that's what it says. And the reason they haven't been quote unquote returned is because number one, they would be returned to Jordan and Egypt, who controlled them. And in fact, Israel did offer the Gaza Strip back to Egypt, and Egypt didn't want it. They didn't want it.
So I'm going to read it to you again, not because I don't know how to say it. I don't want to seem like I'm being a dick here, but I want you to read it because again, what you just stated isn't true. And the resolution is 242, and UN resolution 242. Which is typically for the audience's benefit, because I'm sure you know all this, but it's typically accompanied by UN Resolution 338. One is about sort of stopping war. The other is about territorial integrity and what would, for at least a few decades, be known as the right to exist, which of course has changed in terms of its language and its scope. We could talk about that another time. But I'm gonna read to you what it actually says as opposed to what you're saying.
Well, I said specifically that I don't remember the exact language that is
okay, but again, you're misrepresenting the spirit of what I'm not pinging you for not having the exact language. I'm saying the spirit of it you're misrepresenting. I'm not saying just like it's just like the thing with the borders. I'm not saying you have to have it exact. I'm saying the spirit of it you're misrepresenting. Like if I said the Emancipation Proclamation legalized slavery, and then you pointed it up and said, no, here it emancipates you, and I go, oh, I said I didn't know it exactly. No, it's fundamentally different. I'm actually challenging your representation of the spirit of it. But here it is, so we don't have to guess. This is 1967. It says, the Security Council, in its continuing concern with the grave situation in the Middle East, emphasized the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war and the need to work for a just and lasting peace. So the first point, UN Resolution 242 reinforces the arguments and the goal, frankly, of the post-World War I and definitely post-World War II global order, which was the end of empire and the birth of the nation state. That is to say, you can't just go around taking people's land. You can't just go around.
They definitely weren't taking people's land. The 1967 war was started not by Israel, but by the country.
I want you to listen. I want you to hear what I just said, Ayaan, and not just retreat to the talking point. I said the post-World War I. Listen to me.
What you're saying.
No, I said the post-World War I and post-World War II social order. I wasn't talking about Israel. I said the entire goal of the formation of the nation state, the creation of the League of Nations, all was to prevent the acquisition of territory by war. Israel hadn't been founded yet. World War II was in 1914. I'm not even thinking about Israel when I'm saying that. This had nothing to do with Israel. I'm saying that the point of the new social order was to dismantle empires and build nations. Now that you understand that more clearly, do you agree with what I just said?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So back to the point. Emphasizing the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war and the need to work for a just and lasting peace. They say, here's what we're going to do. Right? The fulfillment of these charters is Article 2 of the Charter. In accordance with Article 2 of the Charter, I'm speeding through it just so I don't want to belabor it. But here are the principles. One, withdrawal of Israel armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict, the 1967 war. That meant that Israel would withdraw from East Jerusalem.
I'm sorry. I know this all, and again, I think this is kind of just filibustering.
Filibustering what? This is literally, you just said the opposite of this, and I'm showing you that what you're saying isn't true.
That's not what I said. What I said, and I was pretty close actually, is that the language in it specifically does not say Israel just secede all this land and give it up. It says work towards, very specifically, work towards.
Right, and here's how. Right? Okay, first, I discount your narration of what happened. I asked you a question, which was, Israel was supposed to withdraw in 1967, and then that's how we got here. And then you explained that, well, they're supposed to, but only after a certain thing.
That's not what I said. Wait,
yeah, working towards the goal of working toward a just and lasting peace. What they said is, in order to work toward the peace, here's what needs to happen. Right? Number one, Israel needs to leave. They said for them to work toward this peace, Israel has to withdraw from the territories occupied in the recent conflict. And two, termination of all claims or states of belligerency and respect for and acknowledgement of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area. In other words, Israel needs to pull out, and everybody needs to respect the border. So now you can't pretend Israel's not a state anymore. You can't do the thing that I talked about between 48 and 67. No, now you have to respect the territorial integrity of Israel. You have to respect its sovereignty. You have to recognize Israel as a nation state, right? So you have to do that right now, Arab world. You have to do that right now. You have to recognize Israel right now. But Israel, you have to leave the West Bank right now, and they didn't.
Neither, and the Arab world didn't recognize Israel. I don't get what your point is right now.
So
you're saying you're putting all the onus on Israel when there's other parties involved. It also says lasting peace. Do you disagree?
No. Hold on. I'm not putting all the onus on Israel. I'm responding to the first part. I agree with you that for a long time they didn't recognize Israel. That was my point before we had this exchange. I said between 1948 and 1967, this didn't happen. And for even after 1967, even after the Khartoum conference and other things, there were people who didn't recognize Israel as a sovereign state. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, today people still don't recognize Israel as a sovereign state.
That's fine. However, I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm disagreeing with is your claim that Israel didn't have a doctrinal and legal duty based on this resolution, one you alluded to leave the COP. They did and they didn't.
Is resolution 242 the Security Council?
I'm sorry?
Is this the Security Council resolution or is this a General Assembly resolution?
General Assembly resolution.
Okay,
Security Council resolution. Excuse me.
Okay. So again, it says work towards. That's why there were 5 peace deals after this that the Palestinians refused to take. Israel's not just going to pull out and keep it on the deal when all that followed every time after a peace deal, there were terrorist attacks that followed suit.
They didn't keep their in the deal in 1967 on November 22nd.
They didn't keep their end of the deal on
from the beginning.
And neither did anyone else.
That's not true. Are you familiar with the letters of mutual recognition?
That sure, yes. And then I'm also familiar with the 5 no's. So I mean, they're like, it's a moot point if you're just putting all the onus on Israel constantly for not upholding their end of the deal after they just got attacked.
Hold on. Okay, let me pause again, just for clarity's sake, not to be a jerk. There's no such thing as the 5 no's.
The 3 no's.
But I think you mean the 3 no's.
I said
what are the 3 no's?
The 3 no's. Okay, this is. I'm sorry, Mark.
No, I'm not worried about the 3 versus the 5. I'm talking about the specifics of the problem.
We're arguing at 11:30 p.m. and I mixed up 3 and 5. It just seems like
here's what I'm saying. Pause. Let's pause for a second. Sure. I don't think you heard me. I said I'm not worried about the 3 versus the 5. I'm worried about the substance of the no's. I don't care that you got 3 versus 5, except we all make mistakes. We all have typos. We all stumble. That's just a human error. I don't care about the 5 versus the 3. I'm saying, what were the no's?
The specific no's? It was no normalization, no. I can't remember the exact definition.
So what relevance are the 3 no's to your point? Maybe I don't.
I said that we're not going to recognize the state of Israel.
Right, and so
that goes against Resolution 242.
Right, and I guess what I want you to understand is that that's not what the 3 no's are. So the for the audience's sake, the talking point is no peace, no negotiation, no recognition. Is that am I encapsulating your argument properly?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to pull up an Israeli scholar, not a pro-Palestinian scholar, but an Israeli scholar.
Which scholar?
What'd you say?
Which scholar?
Which one do you find credible? And I'll pull one up from them.
Again, this is, I mean, if we're debating other scholars, I'm happy to debate another scholar. But if we're debating each other, it's like you ask me a question, I answer.
Right. And what I'm saying is, what you just said is inaccurate. But I don't want the audience to take my word for it. I'm going to pull from another scholar, an expert.
I just asked you what the scholar was. I never disagreed with what scholar.
Let's take scholars off the table. If you look at the actual what do you call it? Proceedings of the Khartoum of the conference. Excuse me. Have you actually? I'll tell you what I'm worried about, and I'll be honest. I'll be frank with you. I think you've heard that as a talking point, and I doubt you've never actually read the actual proceedings of the 1967 Arab League Summit, which is what
I actually read the actual documents that were written. No analysis based off of it. I read the actual.
And in the document, you're saying they said no? You're saying they said no peace? You really believe they said that?
Again, we can pull up the exact wording of the documents. However, if you're trying to make the argument, if you're again, we're getting. We're getting again caught on minor details, which have
These aren't minor details. Let me explain to you why. If you hear me out,
details, because hold on. You're saying that there was an agreement, Resolution 242, where there were parties that had to adhere to something. My argument, devoid of any nitty-gritty details where I can name or quote the exact language or verbiage used, okay, is that there was definitely not peace. There was definitely not normalization. And if anything, the only party that was trying to create peace were the Israelis. That's why there were 5 peace deals. And Clinton, in his biography, said that the biggest mistake was Arafat. And again, this is just to say that you're bringing up trying to demonize and putting all the onus on Israel when there were other.
Not at all. I asked it. So to respond to that, I'm not getting into the weeds. What you have a habit of doing in this exchange, respectfully, is you point to a piece of evidence. And then when I challenge your interpretation of that evidence, you say, well, let's not get into the weeds of it. So if I don't get into the weeds of it, for example, you said the 3 no's, right? Yes. I'm saying that you're misrepresenting the 3 no's. How can I prove that you're misrepresenting the 3 no's except to put up the 3 no's? So because if you read the 3 again, and just to be clear, what came first, the 3 no's or this resolution? Because that's important, and that's not a nitpicky thing. What came first?
The 3 no's or the what?
Or the resolution? Yeah.
I don't know which came first.
Right. So, all right. So, but that's important, right? Because no. I need you to hear me out. I need you to hear me out. Hear me out. Just listen for a second. If the 3 no's came after the resolution, your point would be a compelling one, because it would be like the Arabs were saying, "Fuck that resolution." No. That's 5 no's, but you get my point. Like they'd be like, no. But that isn't what happened. The resolution came as a mechanism to create peace after the conference, after the so-called 3 no's. So even if you were right about the 3 no's, this resolution came afterward as a way of creating peace. So that is not a minor detail. It seems minor to you maybe, but it's actually the most relevant thing. But to be clear, The Khartoum Conference, for the audience's sake, because again, I know you know this, was September of 1967. November of 1967 is when this resolution was created. The three no's, which is a very strong talking point. No peace with Israel, no negotiation with Israel, no recognition of Israel, is seen as a kind of evidence that the Arabs were recalcitrant, right? Is that a fair representation of how people see the three no's?
Yeah, it's basically an agreement among Arab parties on their future policy towards the state of Israel.
Right. So the no peace was not, we're going to be bellicose. It was no peace, no formal peace treaty. And the reason why there was no formal peace treaty was because there was no land agreement. Then after that, it was no peace. I know it in Arabic, I'm trying to think, no negotiation. It wasn't no negotiation at all. It was no direct negotiations. Right? Meaning we want an intermediary. We want an intermediary. We want an honest broker. That is different, right? And it wasn't no recognition of Israel at all. It was no de jure recognition of Israel, right?
That's not what happened. That's not what happened.
You're saying that's not. Hold on. Just so I'm clear. When you say that's not what happened, I'm telling you what the proceedings were in the conference. Are you saying it didn't turn out that way?
The proceedings in the conference were that some Arab states were open to the recognition of Israel and recognizing that Israel has a right to exist. And it was in fact the PLO, and you can read the actual documents and the transcripts of the conversations being taken place, where the PLO were very vocal that they want no language that ever allows for the existence of the state of Israel.
Which is my point, right? There's a difference between a kind of de jure recognition and a de facto recognition. But all of this stuff from the conference is before the resolution that's on our screen right now. So that's what I'm saying. Even if your representation of the conference were 1,000% right, that wouldn't negate the fact that UN Resolution 242 comes in to create peace afterward. That's what I'm saying. The order matters. You made it seem as if, in fact, I would say you misrepresented, not intentionally, but to the average. No, I don't think you were. I swear to God, on my mother's life, I don't think you're being dishonest here. I just think the way it came out, it would have led the audience to believe that this resolution came out, and then the Arabs said no afterward, and they didn't. That happened before. I think that's you can pretend that's not an important piece of information, but it absolutely is.
The reason I don't think it's important, and I think we've also strayed very far away from our original conversation, so I'm also happy to move on to the other topics after this. But the reason I don't think it's relevant is because, number one, the 1967 war was not started by Israel. And the fact that Israel, when you say, why didn't they return it? Israel did offer multiple times, in fact, 5 times since the 1967 war for a peace deal. And every time the Palestinians either didn't show up to the table or they rejected it. And so when you put the onus on Israel saying that, why didn't they just give up the land? Well, they offered to, but they also want peace in return, which I don't think is that ridiculous. Would you disagree?
What you represented as the facts, absolutely, I would agree with that. With the conclusion you draw based on the premise you laid out, but I don't agree with the premise.
Okay.
Most Israelis at this point, certainly Israeli historians would argue that Israel fought a preemptive, that the 1967 war was a preemptive war. You're saying that you disagree with that, and you're saying that it was a defensive war.
I think most historians would argue that it was a defensive war. Israel did preemptively strike, but I mean, all historical records.
Which one is but you're saying again? This is why I want the audience to understand. When you initially said was Israel didn't start this war, that would lead people to believe that Israel was attacked and defended itself. But
no, it's not. No, it's not, because under international law.
No, I said what the audience would be led to believe. I just want to be clear for the audience's benefit. You're acknowledging that Israel struck first, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just clarifying for the audience. Now continue what you're saying.
But I'm saying under international law, you can still have a defensive war if you strike first. If you know that the enemy is going to attack and you preemptively strike, that is still considered to be a defensive war.
And are you saying that that's the consensus on this particular war?
I would say that many scholars would agree.
Would you say most scholars? Would you say even the majority of scholars?
I don't have the exact statistics.
I mean, would you say it's even close to 50? Would you say that's a majoritarian position?
I'm not going to make an absolute statement. I would say a lot of leading scholars.
So again, this is where the sleights of hand happen in people's estimation, right? You start by saying international law allows this to happen, And then I say, well, does international law support this one? And you say, well, I don't know. So then it's irrelevant. Yes, international law does allow for some defensive wars. This is not one of them. And that's not the consensus. That's not even close to the consensus. So again, it would be like me saying, you came into my house, right? And I don't want you to feel like I'm attacked. I come in your house and you shoot me. I come in and you shoot me. And then you say, well, I have a right to defend my house. The law says I have a right to defend myself in my home if someone's attacking me. Sure. But the details of what I'm doing in your house would dictate whether this was an example of that. And so without those details, it would be misleading to suggest that the law is on your side. If it turns out I was selling Girl Scout cookies, it'd be like, maybe you shouldn't have shot me, right? I'm not suggesting that the Arab world was selling Girl Scout cookies. What I am suggesting is that the international legal community does not argue the position that you're arguing. That's not the consensus. And in fact, what I think a more compelling argument. Nah, I wouldn't say that. I don't want to put arguments in your mouth. That's not fair. What I was going to give you a better argument, but what I'll say at the end of the day is that's not true. It's just not true. That Israel. Anyway, it's not true. But I appreciate you at least acknowledging that Israel struck first, even if you and I ultimately disagree on whether it was a legitimate strike or not. I think we can agree to disagree on that because that's a different conversation for a different time.
Yeah, I think it plays into the 1956 war and the Straits of Tiran, but we can agree to disagree.
You said, I'm sorry, say that again. I just didn't hear you.
I'm saying it plays into the 1956 war, the 1967 war in terms of the relationship between Egypt and Israel. But I'm sure we can.
How so?
Well, from my understanding, is after the 1956 war that the Egyptians closed the Straits of Tiran, and the agreement was that they wouldn't. And then, what was it? Al Nasser announced that he would close it for Israel, and then moved a bunch of troops to the border.
Explain to me. I'm not following your connection here. So talk to me more about the Straits of Tiran, if you want to. If you want to move on with Cam, I'm not following your argument.
In 1956, there was a war between Israel and Egypt about the Straits of Tiran, about the closure, right? And the agreement, the armistice agreement, was that it wouldn't be closed, that the Egyptians wouldn't close them. And then tensions started heightening, and Al Nasser said that he would close the Straits of Tiran, and Israel said, if you guys do this, we're going to attack you. And they did that, and Israel attacked them. And that was after the Egyptians moved troops to the border of Israel. And there should be no reason, based on the armistice lines, that there were any troops near the border of Israel. And that's what I say, that it's a preemptive attack. And that's the argument by many scholars on why it was a defensive war. Now, I understand that you disagree with that, and you're saying that the majority of scholars disagree. That's okay. I'm just giving the example of why many make the argument that it was a defensive war.
Yeah, I think that argument has fallen out of favor with most legal scholars in the last 30 years, but we can agree to disagree. Sure. Let's move on completely before, I know it's late. One last topic. Talk to me about campuses. I'll go anywhere you want to go.
Simple argument. The SJP, the group, is a fundamentally violent movement that self-identifies as part of Hamas's resistance axis.
Say more about the violent part.
I think they frequently break campus policy. They frequently break the rules. If you want me to give specific examples, and I'm happy to if we want.
But you're saying SJP is fundamentally a violent organization? Fundamentally
a violent organization. If you say you're part of would you say Hamas is a fundamentally violent organization?
It's a resistance movement. Yeah, I think all resistance movements are violent. Yeah.
Okay, so it's violent. Okay, so if you say that you're part of that resistance movement, then by the transitive property, wouldn't that also fundamentally make you violent?
Yeah, but again, I'm rejecting the premise of your claim.
How are you fundamentally rejecting the premise of my claim?
Are you saying that SJP
open statements? You can go online, you can read any statement that they published after October 7th, and every single one they say that they're part of the resistance and that they support the resistance.
So there are several problems with the argument. I'm pacing myself mentally just so I don't burn out. I'm going to make a few notes. One, if I say, let's say for a minute I accepted your analysis of Hamas without any nuance or critique.
Sure.
Are you saying then that if I say I support what they're doing and I never leave this desk, I'm a violent person?
A violent movement. I definitely think that if you support violence and you're part of a movement that's also tied to violence, that, yeah, I would say, I mean, I guess we could put an irrelevant percentage on it, but I definitely say if you're a movement that consistently breaks the rules, where based on every college campus that you're part of, you're banned. And
hold on. Now this is where we become. You say I'm getting too in the nitty gritty. That's not true. That every college campus at SJP is on they've been banned. That's nowhere close to true. You acknowledge that's not true, right?
I would say that.
You said every campus that they've been on, they've been banned. Can you just one time say, you know what? Hold on. Can you just one say, you know what? Can you just say I misspoke and let that go? Because this hyperbole becomes very frustrating. They're not banned on every campus. They're not banned on most campuses. It's just not true. Just say that's not true.
I think on most, no. Actually, on most campuses, they've either been suspended or banned. Yes.
Show me evidence of that.
I would.
Where are you getting that from?
They're at 150 campuses across America and Canada. I'm not going to spend my time right now Googling every single campus and finding out the campus policy. What I can tell you, hold on.
Hold on. Let me pause you. So if you've never done that work, where are you getting that conclusion from?
No, I don't have a notes document where I list every single campus that's
not my question. That's not what I'm asking. You're misunderstanding my question.
I can tell you. I can tell you. They've been banned at Penn. You wanted a list.
That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm asking you. So we don't go. You said that they've been banned from the majority of campuses. Have you ever done research that demonstrates to you that the majority of SJPs have been banned?
Yes.
Okay. Can you lead me where?
Again, you can go on every single. I mean, you can go at news clips and see where they've been banned, and then I provided you a list, and you interrupted me during that.
Provide me with the 70. You said there's 150 SJPs.
There's 150 organizations.
So 76. You counted that 76 have been banned at least.
I didn't count specifically 76 have been banned.
Then how do you know it's the majority? Where are you getting majority from? 76 is the majority, correct?
Just because I didn't specifically count something doesn't mean that it doesn't hold true.
But how do we know if it holds true or not? You have to count them.
Okay. I'm going to hold my point that most have been banned. This is an irrelevant discussion. This is This is getting into the nitty gritty.
It is ridiculous. Let's stop then. You're making things up. You're literally saying you've never counted it, but you know it's at least 76. Based on what?
Well, then I can start listing them for you.
List them for me.
Okay. UNC, Brown, Penn, Columbia.
Hold on, I'm counting. Okay, go ahead. Actually, I don't have to count them. Go ahead.
This is ridiculous.
Are you telling me that you've counted? Can you, Eyal, sometimes in a debate, you can just say, you know what? I actually don't know the answer to this, but I know it's been a lot. But I don't know.
Okay, can you tell me how many SJP chapters have been suspended or banned?
I don't know the answer. That's why I won't make a claim to know. I don't pretend to know. I don't have any idea how many have been suspended. So I wouldn't say to you, you're wrong. I'm asking you to demonstrate to support a claim you made.
I think there's more substantive stuff. Okay, I think there's more substantive stuff. I misspoke. Let's move on.
And Eyal, if you had said to me, you know what? I counted them and it's 76. I wouldn't have asked you to list them. But it was just eyebrow raising to me that you say to me, like if I said to you, the majority of pro-Israel groups on campus have been criminally charged.
Zero.
And you said, based on what? And I said, well, I can name 5 off the top of my head. And you say, yeah, but there's thousands.
I can name more, but I don't think spending this much time talking about this. Listen, I misspoke. Let's move on. I don't think this has to do with their violence. So let's move on.
Okay, thank you. You misspoke. Fine.
Okay.
Continue.
So I think fundamentally, when you have a movement that idealizes U.S. designated terrorist organizations, and we can disagree, but these are American universities that receive money from the U.S. government. So when you idealize terrorist organizations, when you break campus policies specifically, when you erect encampments which shut down graduation and classes, that to me culminates into a fundamentally violent movement.
Hold on. You said because again, I want to make sure
Yeah.
I got you right. You said encampments, breaking school policies. Like what kind of policies?
What type of school policies? Well, the encampments were breaking both school policies and state laws.
Okay, it doesn't make sense. Okay, fine. I
Doesn't
won't.
that make sense?
Well, you're listing the things they do wrong. You said they're breaking the laws and they're building encampments. And then I say, well, what laws are they breaking? You're saying the encampments. That's one thing. So I'm just asking to understand, well, other than encampments, what else are they doing? If you're saying it's just encampments, then that's the law and that's fine. But
No. Sorry, not just the encampments. I'm happy to provide.
That's what I'm asking you. Give me more.
Okay. Well, if you look at college campuses, I'll give you an example of Penn just last month. All over campus, Sinwar Lives was written on various school signage. The month before that, red paint.
What was written on campus?
Sinwar Lives, like Yahya Sinwar, was written on signs.
Again, I don't want insight. I'm not challenging you. My audience doesn't know what that means. Just tell them.
Sinwar Lives?
Yeah. Never mind. Continue. It's fine. Never mind. Continue.
Red paint was splattered on the Benjamin Franklin statue at Penn. At Columbia, the entirety of, I believe.
I'm sorry, what was written? What was written? I just didn't hear you.
It was red paint was splattered all over the Benjamin Franklin statue. At Columbia, they broke into, I think it was Hamilton Hall, and there's wide videos that anyone can go watch of them smashing windows and physically taking over a building. And I actually spoke to reporters who went in, and they said that the entirety of the doors were barricaded. If a fire had broken out, every single student would have died. That there were people that weren't part of Columbia's community that were also present there, where there were needles, like actual needles, were found on the ground. I can keep going to other college campuses if you would like.
Okay, so yeah, Yahya Sinwar was leader of Hamas.
Yes.
That's all I was asking you to tell the audience. You seemed stumped by that.
You seemed stumped. You asked me.
No, not at who it was. You didn't seem to understand what I was asking. So I'm saying I want the audience asking me what you were talking about. That's what I said. Just explain to you. Again. Okay. My audience comes with different levels of understanding of what's going on, and so again, I'm being a bit didactic, not to be condescending, but so that they know, because they're literally in my notes asking who's Sinwar. That's why I asked you to say it. That was all. But to your bigger point, yeah, I mean, I guess I think for me, I wouldn't consider that I hear you. I mean, I think for me, when we talk about college campuses, breaking the rules, I don't assume that breaking the rules is inherently bad when you're talking about activism. So that's where I start. Right. At Columbia and Penn, both of which I'm pretty familiar with, and I spent a lot of time on those campuses. I was a student at Penn and a professor on the Columbia campus. But more recently, I was on both campuses during the encampments a lot. As you know, I think you've mentioned it to me. I spoke at the Penn encampment one night, and I spoke at the Columbia encampment as well. But I was in the Rutgers encampment, but I was also there, like physically observing, watching. I don't begin from the premise. That two premises. One, well, I'll leave the second one for a moment because that's more provocative, and it'll take us down a whole other hall. I don't begin from the premise that that movements have to follow the rules. I don't know of any resistance movement that has ever not broken laws or not followed rules. Would you agree with that?
I couldn't name all of them. We're not trying to be absolutist, right?
No, I'm speaking in general terms. I'm just saying in general, breaking the rules is part of being part of a resistance movement. Like no one resists by following the laws and rules of the day.
But you see, I don't want you to characterize this as just some meager.
No. I'm going to go to your specific examples. I'm going to go to your specific examples. I'm just telling you. I will, but I listened to your entire list. Now I'm responding to your list. I'm just explaining where I come from philosophically.
Okay.
You said you don't want to get into the nitty gritty, so I'm moving in a different direction. I'm trying to speak more kind of big picture about what's going on. And I'm saying, yeah, I for me, it's always which rules, which laws, and what's at stake, right? I don't think that we should break rules. I don't draw a one-to-one correlation between ethics, morality, and the law, right? Sometimes laws are unjust. Sometimes the rules are unfair.
Wait, I'm sorry, but I don't want to get. You asked me for specific examples.
Yeah, I know.
Hold on. If I hadn't been able to provide those specific examples, you would have then gotten on my case for why I'm not able to provide specific examples. So, in terms of these broader philosophical ideas, which I'm happy to engage you on, do you think that the Columbia SJP, which took over the
Dude, I'm literally answering that question. Yeah, I'm answering your question.
It's just a yes or no.
I'm answering your question. You have not asked me a question tonight that I haven't answered. I'm answering your question. I'm giving you and the audience the context for my answer. Some things aren't yes or no. Just because you say something's yes or no doesn't make it yes or no. Would you agree with that?
I believe in certain things that are binary, yes.
Yes, and I believe some things are non-binary, this being one of them. Because you often ask questions that presume facts that I don't agree with are facts. And so I want to I'm making a case for something. How about this? Give me 60 seconds uninterrupted and you'll have an answer to your question. Is that reasonable?
Sure.
Okay. I believe that there are laws that are just and fair. There are some that are not. And so for me, when we talk about the SJP, the first point you made about SJP being a violent movement or a rule breaking, not violent, a rule breaking movement, the violence I'm gonna get to, a rule breaking movement, that isn't inherently problematic to me. And the specific examples you give, saying Sinwar lives to me, first, writing on buildings, writing on benches, I have no issue with that. As such, it depends on what you're writing. No, but I'm saying as such. For example, if they'd written Free the Land, if they write Stop Anti-Semitism, I don't think either of us would be here saying, oh my God, they wrote Stop Anti-Semitism on the bench. We may not like writing on the bench, and I don't like people who write on benches, but what I'm saying is that the messaging is as important as the act itself. So I don't begin from the place that just writing on the bench is a problem. It's what are you writing, right? And then how do we think about that writing in the context of free speech? I don't think writing Sinwar lives is wrong, even if it's something that I wouldn't do strategically. And
you don't think writing Sinwar lives, the man who was the mastermind before October 7th, is wrong? Not only is it vandalization, but it's idealizing the person who is responsible for October 7th, which you have condemned. That you have condemned October 7th. I've watched a lot of your debates. You've condemned October 7th, saying it was not a good day because they did target civilians. Now, you don't think writing the mastermind behind October 7th, vandalizing property, is wrong?
So that's why I was trying to stipulate. And that's why I asked you to let me finish, right? Because we end up in a place where you misunderstood what I'm saying, and we didn't have to do that, right? You could have just heard me out. So, remember the third. If you heard the third piece of what I said, which was how do we not just talk about what's within the rules, but also what's permissible within the context of free speech, right? I'm talking again. Ethics, morality, rules, free speech. These are all the pieces that we have to think about. And I know you want a yeses and nos to what's right and what's wrong. But I don't think that's a nuanced or sophisticated way to think about things. And we're not on cable news. We're not in a court of law. We don't have to cross-examine. We can just, we can talk through it. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I think that, and again, this is a much more complicated conversation than yes or no. But I think that when you talk about what I would do versus what people have a right to do are two different things. I see Hamas as the kind of centerpiece of the debate and the conversation and the outrage. And I think that misses all this other context that makes people's understanding different. I know plenty of people in SJPs and on campuses who would say, we don't agree with the killing of innocent people. We don't agree with the killing of unarmed civilian, but we absolutely support Palestinian resistance. And we support the spirit of resistance. We support the movement. And when leaders are killed and we put their name on benches, it may mean that we support every bit of what they did. We may support Hamas from top to bottom. It would also just may mean we support Palestinian resistance. I don't want to speak for those activists. I don't know them. I was the director of. I was the.
They write Sinwar lives, and you're saying you don't know what they mean.
Yeah, I know that for a lot of people. Again, I'm only speaking about the people who I know and I've experienced directly as activists on this specific subject. I'm not speaking abstract. I'm talking on this specific thing. A lot of people disagree with certain principles of Hamas, but still believe in the movement. And long live the revolution, long live so and so.
Okay, okay. It's been way longer than 60 seconds, and you still haven't addressed either.
Wait. I asked for 60 seconds. I interrupted. I've never gotten it. So we're having a dialogue, and I'm okay with
it. Filibuster. I'm just asking if taking over the building in Colombia was violent or not.
Do I think what is violent?
That when SJP at Columbia took over a building and smashed windows, was that fundamentally wrong, or was that justified and more nuanced?
So those are two different questions, right? The violent part, yes, it's violent. That's initially what you asked, right? That's what you initially asked, right?
Yeah, was it violent?
It
wasn't violent.
You said it was not?
I definitely think it is. I was saying, what was it violent? Question mark.
I just said it was definitely violent. That's why I was confused. I thought I misheard you. I said it was definitely violent. I said that. I stipulated that already. That's why I didn't understand it. So, but the right or wrong part becomes the part that I don't think we can answer yes or no. I just don't. I'm going to put a pin in that for a second and ask you to show you what I mean.
Okay.
Do you think the bomb, the Haganah and the Irgun's actions were right or wrong?
Wrong.
Right. I would say there's nuance to that. There's nuance to everything. I wouldn't say it's all wrong, right? I absolutely wouldn't.
I wouldn't say it's all wrong because I'm not analyzing every specific action, but
right.
But wait, hold on. For instance, would you identify the KKK, for instance, as a wrong group? Because I unequivocally will say that they
absolutely.
are a violent wrong group.
I think they are. Yeah, absolutely.
Why can't you then make the exact same argument saying, well, some of them aren't violent?
Because I don't believe that Hamas is anywhere analogous to the KKK. That's where you and I disagree. You cannot look at a liberation movement, a resistance movement to colonial occupation, to apartheid, to settler violence, to siege, to open air imprisonment, and renounce the movement as such, even if you disagree with tactics. The fundamental purpose of the KKK is racial terrorism. It's white nationalism. It's eugenics. There is not a no. I'm not going to allow you to cut me off here, because this you're not going to ask me a question about the KKK and Hamas and not allow me to say what I have to say fully. That's absurd. I insist. So there is nothing morally redemptive about the KKK. There is not a morally defensible position that I have found with the KKK that would permit me to, or that would require me rather, to be anything other than unequivocal in my renouncement of them and their tactics, both their mission and their tactics. I do not believe that Palestinian liberation organizations, particularly this Palestinian liberation organization, is the same for two reasons. One, their fundamental goal is national liberation, which I believe is a righteous cause and righteous struggle. So at the core, they're not analogous to the KKK, just for that reason alone. And then the
charter calls for the
and then the second reason, and then the second reason, I'm happy to engage everything that I'm saying, but I'm insisting that you allow me to finish.
It's just filibuster after filibuster. It's hard to engage.
What have I said? What did I just say that was excess? What did I just say that was excess?
It was just very simple to say I unequivocally condemn the KKK because there's nothing redeemable about them, which I agree with you on.
That is what I just said.
But it's a very and then you start
saying, let me put it differently.
Hold on,
you don't get to dictate the way
Hamas when Hamas's original charter literally calls for the annihilation.
You may disagree with me, but you don't have a right to dictate how I respond or the way I respond. I disagree with the way you answer questions, but I still listen to you, and I may push back and challenge you. But I don't tell you that the way you're talking is excessive or unnecessary, or dismiss it as filibustering, which suggests that I'm somehow being dishonest or evasive or disingenuous in my response. I'm giving you a thorough, nuanced analysis, which is what I think requires a subject like this, and specifically a conversation about the KKK and Hamas, which you raised. And so I am not going to allow you to shape how I answer a question. I'm
not shaping how you're answering a question.
Well, no, you are. You're saying that I'm filibustering. I'm not filibustering.
Far away from the original conversation.
That's fine. All right, let me ask you a question. Do you want to stop here? Do you want to stop here? Then we can stop here. Let's stop here. And
so we're just not going to address any.
I'm trying to answer you. This is what I'm saying. I haven't answered the question yet fully. I'm going to answer the question. Would you like to be here when I answer the question and allow me to finish, or would you not? It's up to you.
Okay, I don't like you patronizing me, but yes.
I'm not patronizing you. You keep interrupting me, telling me I'm filibustering. You don't get to dominate the conversation and control how I answer a question. I'm going to answer, and then you can respond. Why is that so challenging for you?
Okay, I'm going to go on. You can answer the question.
Thank you for your permission of answering the question. Thank you for giving me permission to answer. So the first thing is fundamentally, I disagree with, I don't think it's, your question was, why is it easy to denounce the KKK and not Hamas? I'm saying because one has a morally bankrupt mission. I don't believe Hamas's mission is morally bankrupt, because I don't believe that Hamas's fundamental mission is anything other than the liberation of the Palestinian people. KKK also has tactics that I fully denounce, because I could say, well, I disagree with their mission, but I support their right to free speech and free action. But the problem is their actions cause harm to others in ways that are irredeemable. And none of them don't do that. They have no tactics that I could say, well, that one's okay, right? Hamas, however, I feel differently about. Hamas has tactics that I fully disagree with. Again, I am one of the people, as you pointed out, that disagrees with October 7th as a strategy, as a tactic, and as an action, because I don't believe that innocent people should be killed. I don't believe that innocent people should be kidnapped. I don't believe in unarmed people being killed or kidnapped. I don't believe in non-soldiers. I mean, I can go on all the things. I think it violates international law. I think these are war crimes. I think these violate Islamic law as well. So that's why I don't treat Hamas like the KKK, because I don't think they are, any more than I would treat the ANC in South Africa like the KKK, right? I think that there are things with ANC I disagree with, but ultimately it's a liberation struggle, and I don't think it's up to me to dictate to an oppressed people how they liberate themselves, even if I have my own opinions on certain tactics and strategies. With regard to, so when people say, Hamas this, Hamas that, I think the devil is always in the details. I don't think taking over a building is wrong on college campuses. There's a long history on college campuses of taking over buildings. I don't like smashing the windows of the building. I don't like destroying the property of the building. I believe in that the context of that struggle on Columbia campus, it should have been civil disobedience. We shut down the building. We take it over and we make demands. That's my belief. And as an SJP leader in the past, that's what I have done. I disagree, though, based on my insider knowledge, that SJP was responsible for all of the actions you're talking about on the Columbia University campus. That's just not true. That's factually untrue. I knew the organizers. I watched what happened. So again, I'm rejecting the premise of the question, which is, you asked me if I agree or disagree with what SJP did on those campuses, and I'm rejecting the claim that they did it, or that they were even responsible for it. These are all points that have to be said. And then you said red paint. I don't like destruction of property. That's not my thing. But I do believe on a campus, like on these fancy campuses, as long as you're not harming people, that's something else. And then the final piece of it, and I want your response. The final piece of it for me is the question about unsafety. I don't think that any actions should be done that could reasonably and fairly be construed as making the campus climate unsafe for other people, particularly for groups. Like if you do something that makes all the Jewish students or all the Black students or all the undocumented students feel a particular level of unsafety, I am particularly frustrated and outraged by that. I don't, however, believe that discomfort and unsafety are the same thing. And I think oftentimes many of the claims about SJPs and more broadly about Palestinian protests, which I think too often gets lumped as all SJP in the same way like Black Lives Matter became what we called every resistance movement on campus, 5 years ago. I don't think that I think many times, like when people say like free Palestine from the river to the sea, for example, you may not like that, but I don't see that as sufficiently harmful or dangerous to warrant like moral censure or any kind of school action. I just don't believe that. Have I seen acts of anti-Semitism on campuses? Absolutely. And those should be dealt with. People should be kicked out of school. There should be full accountability in whatever the processes are. But I don't think that that's representative of what's happening on the campuses in general.
All done. I think you're making a subjective argument for something that's very objective. Taking over a campus building is violent. It's not. I would disagree with it. It's fundamentally violent. If you look at other college campuses, they've employed very similar tactics. Taking over. You're talking about these fancy campuses. Students pay a lot of money to go to college and to actually take classes. When you're having to close libraries and move classes online because some students feel that they have a right to take over the quad and set up an encampment, that is not just. It's not just. They can do that in a public park. They're not allowed to do it. And you're talking about, well, I disagree, or I would agree, or I disagree with some tactics employed. Hamas's founding charter says to murder every Jew in the world. So you saying that it's a resistance movement or whereas the KKK is wedded to the certain idea, until 2018, the Hamas charter was literally to kill every Jew in the world. That is written down in their charter. And so when you have students, actually, wait, let me pause. Would you agree that 95% of American Jews are Zionist?
I don't know the data, but I would say the overwhelming majority are, yeah.
Okay. So
I would suspect that number's correct, but I can't reach that number because I haven't done the research and I don't speak about numbers. I don't make numbers up.
Fair. What would you call it? 85%? We can low.
I would still be making a number up. I don't know. I'm acknowledging your point that most are, but I don't know. I don't want to stipulate a number because I don't know it, and I don't concede to numbers without data. But continue.
So when you have crowds of people yelling "Zionists get off our campus, Zionists die," you don't think that's inherently violent or in any way do you think that's acceptable behavior on a college campus?
I'm sorry. I thought that was, I'm making note. I'm writing down these questions. I want to hear you fully, and then I'll answer all of them.
No. It's a question. Do you think that's acceptable behavior to call for 85 to 95% of all Jews to get off your campus?
Now, I understand you believe that's a yes or no question. I don't believe that is one. So I'm going. If you're not comfortable with me answering it fully, then I'd rather wait for you to finish, and then I'll answer.
Okay. So if that's going to be a longer answer, then we can skip it.
No, I'm not going to skip it, but even if you decide to leave, but I'm going to answer it. But just because, if I said to you, continue, it's fine.
No. I think if it was any other group where 85% of them identify to something, 90% in the U.S. based on the most recent statistics, and of that, all 90% also feel like it's directly related to their religion. And if it was about any other group, I think you would be able to answer that yes or no. But
I wouldn't.
Really? So you think that if there was a group calling for 90% of a minority group to get off your campus or die, that you would be okay with that?
I'm rejecting the premise of the question, which is that Zionist is a minority group. I'm saying if they said Jews get off the campus, I would agree with you 1,000%. I'm arguing that your argument presumes, and this is why I want you to think about what I'm saying. You don't have to agree with me, but understand that I'm not filibustering. I'm nuancing the question and saying I have a different perspective than you do. Your question presumes, just hear me out. Your question presumes that Jew and Zionist are the same.
That's not what I'm saying. That's actually not what I'm saying. So I knew that would create a larger argument. So I actually am not making that.
No. But what I'm saying is then it's not fair to say that if I don't, that my reluctance to denounce people calling for Zionists off the campus is the same as me. You said any other ethnic group, any other religion. I'm saying they're not the same, because Zionist is not an ethnic group. It's not a religion. Well, it's an ideology.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. Most Black people are Democrats, right? If I were to, and it's not a perfect analogy, I concede that. But if I were to go into a Morehouse campus and say all the Democrats need to get off the campus, I want to lock up all the Democrats. That, even though at a place like Morris, that would be all Black people, right? Unless Democrat is just secret code for Black people, and I understand the argument that many make, the Zionist is now a secret code for Jews. But unless that's the case, then I think just because an overwhelming number of a group subscribe to an ideology, if I have a moral objection, not to the group, but to the ideology, I have a right to have a principled criticism of the ideology. And the people who are criticizing Zionism are not criticizing Judaism, and they're not criticizing Jews. They're criticizing Zionism. They're criticizing Zionism, and I think there are very different, wildly different definitions of Zionism from different camps. So when I talk to many of my Jewish interlocutors, whether it's friends, colleagues, political opponents, whatever, they're often saying, "Oh, Zionism just means, a belief in Israel's right to exist, or a belief in a Jewish homeland," right? And I would say even that is something that's debatable and within the Overton window, right? It's within the boundaries of reasonable debate. We can have a debate about whether or not there should be a Jewish state or not, even if most Jews believe there should be, right? If I said to you, most Muslims believe in Sharia law, right, as the governing law of the state, and you said anybody who believes in Sharia law is a monster, that doesn't mean you're being Islamophobic. Just because most Muslims believe that, and even if I were to argue it's a central component of Islamic faith, it's not one-to-one. I agree with you. There are people, I've seen it myself. There are people who use Zionist and they just mean Jew.
Would you say Khamas uses Zionist as Jew or no?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And the reason why I say that, and the reason
why in their charter did it say Jew until 2018?
That's what I'm. And the reason why I would say that,
yeah,
is one, they've been let me pull it up for you. And I don't believe 2018 is the right year. I think it was earlier than that, but I won't quibble because I don't remember off the top of my head. And if I don't know something, I thought it was a year earlier, but I could be wrong. Again, I'm only saying that for the benefit of the audience, not to quibble about the point. I thought it was 2017, but I could be wrong. In Israel, the national identity is what? The national identity of Jewish citizens is what? Jewish. Israel is a Jewish state. In Israel, there are Jews and there are Arabs, and among other people, Druze and other things. I'm not saying it's only Jews and Arabs, but Jew is the actual identity. I think one of the dangerous parts of a Jewish state, a Jewish ethno-state in particular is what I mean, a Jewish ethno-state. And one of the dangerous parts of political Zionism, which conflates Judaism and Zionism, is that those words get mixed together in really dangerous ways. And that's not to excuse people who are being dishonest or opportunistic or morally corrupt. There are people, again, who are just anti-Semites who use Zionist as secret code for Jew. I agree with you. If you're making that claim, I agree with anybody who makes that claim. But the reason why Hamas changed the chart, again, I thought it was 2017, but whenever it was
2017, it was 2017.
It was, okay, I thought so. Okay. When they made that change in 2017, they did so because they wanted to be clear that their opposition was to Zionism and not to Judaism. You can argue, you can question their motivation, you can question their honesty about that. But I think if you look at, and again, I've spent and I'm sure you have too, I spent a great deal of time in the region, but I probably spend more time than you do talking to Palestinians and Palestinian resistance groups. But maybe not, maybe I don't. Maybe you spend a lot of time in the region talking to Palestinian resistance groups. But I'll tell you my experience speaking to Palestinian resistance groups is I do find that the word that Jewish and Israeli are conflated quite often. But it's not just conflated by Palestinians; it's conflated by the Jewish state. For example, when October 7th happened, we saw a lot of people say this was the largest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, right? Not the largest attack on Israelis since the Holocaust, right? They signify different things. And I think that that's important to understand. Again, I think that the Hamas charter.
You know, the Hamas founding charter in 1980, one of the sources that they use is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, correct? You did know that, right?
You said like two things that aren't accurate. But
which things aren't? I only said one thing.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Continue. I don't mean this with any disrespect, but you say things that aren't true, and because you stipulate them. For example, if I say, you know, that Philadelphia's baseball team, the Yankees, has never had a black player, right? I've said two things wrong there, right? But the conversation is about whether they had a black player or not.
Okay, did the 1980 Hamas charter?
The charter wasn't created in 1980, which is the second thing you said wrong. But I don't want to get pedantic. But you're saying a lot of things that are misleading, and they're not small issues, because the historical timeline is critical for understanding how and why things happen. Whether something is, for example, pre-Reagan, post-Reagan, whether something is
Was the Hamas founding charter, did they reference the Protocols of the Elders of Zion at all?
I'm going to withdraw from the conversation. You don't concede even the smallest of points.
What point do you want me to concede?
Nothing. You're right. You're right. So we're not going to get anywhere. But here's what I'll say. I have no issue with even the most rigorous and thorough critiques of Hamas. I'm not pro Hamas, right? What I have, though, this was, if we're talking about the SJP and their relationship to it, your claim, you begin from a place of saying SJP has a position, right? That is a thing. I reject that from the beginning, right? SJP has a national organization, right? And the first, I think, I'm not saying intentionally, but the first sort of misdirection that happens for the person who hears that is to think that SJP as an organization has a position on being pro-Hamas, when you're mostly talking about individual students or even statements from particular chapters which are not under control by the national organization, right? So that's the first thing, right? So even to say that SJP is a thing, SJP, it does have a national document, and it does have an organizing document, and it doesn't support those things. So that's the first thing. So I mean, I'm sure you've read them. I know you have. There are things that I would say, I don't know if you read that. I'm sure you've read all of SJP's documents. This is your wheelhouse. So I think when you look at SJP's as a national organization. In fact, I could pull it up and show you, or show the audience later after you go if you want. But it's just not true.
Would you concede that?
Just one more thing. I think 10 seconds. But the second thing is, I don't disagree with you, and I want to know what you think about this. I don't have an issue with you criticizing particular actions. What I take issue with, again, there are so many claims here you made about things being inherently violent from SJP that I don't, like you said, taking over a building is inherently violent, right? Yes. So you consider sit-ins inherently violent?
No, taking over a building is different than a sit-in.
What's the difference?
That they were smashing windows and doors. The building was locked.
Remember,
I'm with explaining how violent.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
Broke into the building with I think it was a hammer or a crowbar, smashing the windows to actually enter the building. The building was locked. Then the police came to try and clear out the building. So they moved all the furniture in the building to the doors to lock them in. That is violent. That is a violent takeover of a building. A sit-in in a library is fundamentally different because a sit-in, you're not physically taking anything over with force. And the police, if they want to escort you out, they have the ability to do so. So comparing the two are completely different. A sit-in is against the rules.
Okay, continue. I don't mean to cut you off.
Taking over a building is violent.
So if I sit in a building and take it over and don't leave, but don't break the windows, we just all walk into a restaurant and say we're never leaving, or we sit on a bridge and never leave, you're fine with it. That's fine.
I don't think it's fine. I still think it's breaking the rules, but it's fundamentally different than a violent takeover of a building. No, so you're talking about leaders of the group that you're familiar with and stuff. Everyone saw the Columbia leader who said in a call with the Columbia, I think it's like the judicial board or something, saying, "I want to murder every single Zionist." And then, do you know what I'm talking about? Kamani James.
I don't know. Tell me again. I'm gonna look it up.
The Columbia student who said that he wants to murder every Zionist.
Is that what he said?
Kamani James.
Okay. Continue. I'm not disputing your claim. I'm noting it for research. So I covered it at the time. I thought he said something slightly different, but I thought he said like they don't deserve to live. But again, I might be wrong. So
be grateful that I'm not just going out and murdering Zionists. Zionists don't deserve to live.
That's what he said.
Zionists don't deserve to live. Do you think that's
they're not fit to live? And be grateful that I'm not doing. Okay. Again, I'm not defending it. I just like to be precise because
I'm saying, do you think that's a violent statement though?
I think it incites violence. I think it's dangerous and wrong. And if you consider incitement violent, then sure. I think saying people deserve to die in a public space is inciting violence, and I think it's just as wrong as actually calling for violence. I don't make any moral distinction between the two. I think it's wrong. I'm denouncing it. I mean, I don't know what to say.
Okay, thank you. And then he sent out an apology, and then just recently, I don't know if you saw this last month, Columbia SJP said that he doesn't apologize for anything. They don't care about anything, and then he posted, "I didn't even write that apology. I don't believe a word of it."
Okay.
That's Columbia SJP. Columbia SJP has also posted that the group seeks, quote, "the total eradication of Western civilization." Like when you have so many chapters on different campuses, not only committing acts of violence, and a great example is actually the day before you spoke on Penn's campus.
Now, I want you to send me that because I haven't seen that. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying I just haven't seen it.
Which one?
The more recent statement. I just haven't seen it, so I can't speak to it. I know that I have thoughts on Kamani that I'd rather not share, but just because of some of the privacy stuff. But he was suspended
because he was issued an apology. That was part of the terms, and then he retracted the apology. Right before you spoke on Penn's campus, the night before, a Jewish student was walking not in the encampment, and 5 individuals surrounded him with strobe lights. And I can send you the video about this too if you want, if you need confirmation, saying, "You better get out of here. Hope you have a good dental plan. We're going to send you into the hospital."
And those were SJPs?
They were part of the encampment that SJP erected. I mean, if SJP starts an encampment, they are responsible for the people that are there. Everyone is masked, so it's impossible to actually find out who.
So we don't know if they're SJP or not. The reason I say that is because as somebody who's been an organizer for a long time and an activist, I can tell you there are lots of movements and things that we've called for, and then people come on and do wild shit that we didn't ask for and that we told them not to do. Just Ferguson, Missouri is a perfect example of that, where we were marching and suddenly people throw a Molotov cocktail and it wasn't us. Or somebody would hit a police officer and we'd all get tear gassed, and we weren't asking them to do that. And to be clear, I was not a Ferguson organizer, but I was there protesting.
I'm just saying, like,
I'm just saying, I don't know if they're SJP or not. I think the Kamani James is a great example. I'm just saying with this other example you're giving, I don't know if they're SJP or not.
Yeah, I'm saying also the Columbia official SJP statement saying the total eradication of Western civilization.
Let me see that. Again, I don't know it, but here's the thing.
Don't you think I'm sorry, if you're like an organizer and stuff for these groups, don't you think it's a problem that you don't know about this stuff? Shouldn't that be prevalent?
I'm not an organizer for them. I'm not an organizer for them. I was a student advisor 5 years ago for one chapter, and I oversaw everything they put out. So no, I don't think it's my responsibility to know the statement of every you said there's 150 of them, right? No, I don't think. Yeah, what'd you say?
150, or that's what's on the website.
Yeah, there's no way. I mean, why would I, just because I'm pro-Palestine, I don't have any.
I think a area where we're fundamentally disagreeing is that do you agree that SJP, in a sense, when they say we are part of the resistance, that they are saying that they're part of
who is
these various chapters? I mean, I can send you article after article.
So again, this is why I'm making the distinction. Two things.
Sure.
One, I don't know how much you know about SJP culture, SJP structure. Then there's a national organization that has a very clear mission and purpose and vision, and then there are student organizations that go in different directions that aren't always consistent with the broader movement.
But they use SJP's. They use
SJP's
name. They get material from them. They're never shunned for doing this stuff. They never.
That's not true. I was gonna say that part's not true.
National SJP condemned Columbia University for the takeover of Hamilton Hall.
Okay, that's a switch, right?
No, I'm giving you a specific example.
No, I know. I didn't. And you, the first thing you said was they never condemn anybody, and I said that's not true. And then you said, "Are you telling me they condemn him?" And I never said that. I was addressing the first.
Sorry, can you give me? I'm actually
to my knowledge, I don't think they condemn taking over Hall. But let me be clear, neither would I. I would disagree with the smashing of the windows. I think the distinction. I mean, even like you said even like a sit-in or taking over a bridge is in and of itself wrong, even though it's not to you violent, it's still wrong because it's breaking the rules. And I'm saying civil disobedience by definition is breaking the rules. That means that you thought Martin Luther King was wrong, just as an example, right? You'd say Martin Luther King was wrong for taking over the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
No.
He took over a bridge.
Martin Luther King because I agree with his mission of Martin Luther King. I don't agree with supporting Hamas. That's why I'm asking. Do you think just so I understand your position clearly? Then you don't actually disagree with taking over buildings and bridges. You disagree with doing it if you don't agree with the mission. No, it depends on what the context is. If you're taking over a library where other students are paying to actually use that library to study, to fulfill their academic mission, and you're prohibiting other students from doing that, then I think you should not be in the library.
But Martin Luther King organized student sit-ins in libraries and took over libraries. He took over bridges where people couldn't drive an ambulance to pick up their grandmother. I mean, or to take someone to a hospital.
Yeah, and I'm confused what your point is I fundamentally let me make this distinction because I think it'll provide a lot of clarity.
Wait, are you about to filibuster or are you about to clarify your position?
I'm going to clarify my position.
Exactly. Go ahead.
I'm going to be quick though. I'm not going to take 4 minutes. I'm saying
4 whole minutes. You're right. Go ahead, finish. And please take 4 minutes if you need it.
I don't need it.
Okay.
I think there's I would have been done by now. I think there's a fundamental difference because I agree with what Martin Luther King was doing. I fundamentally disagree with what SJP is doing. Now, let me finish. Is that with Martin Luther King I don't know. There might be. I haven't heard of any that Martin Luther King was violent. That's why I'm honing in on the violence and not honing in on sit-ins or standing and doing nothing. That's why I'm making that distinction.
Right. And so I'm making the same. I actually said the same thing initially that you said no to. So that's my point. Again, we both began from the place of the violence. You and I both, I think, said like smashing windows and harming people, particularly innocent people, is wrong, right? We both began there. So this isn't a question of whether I denounce that or disagree with it. We start there. The reason I bring the Martin Luther King example is because when people often say breaking the rules is wrong, what they mean is breaking the rules in the service of a mission I disagree with is wrong. And so that's where it gets really complicated, right? I
don't think certain things get really complicated if we focus on what's actually happened on campuses. For instance, 2 weeks ago, I believe you used to be a professor at Temple University, correct?
Yeah.
You're still a professor?
Not at Temple.
Okay. Were you a Professor? Whatever.
Yes, I said yes. I said yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm saying for that an example, SJP protested outside of Hillel on Shabbat, harassing Jews. I don't think that's right, and I also don't think that you would accept that if it was against another minority or ethnic group. If a bunch of Jews went to the mosque and started intimidating, or the Muslim Student Association and started harassing Muslim students, I would condemn that, and I would say that's not okay.
I don't think whether it's Shabbat or not, frankly, anyone should be harassed, right? Even if it's not Shabbat, they shouldn't be harassed. Can we agree to that?
Yes.
Right. So to be clear, I'm making it even broad. I'm putting an even broader swath. Have you ever spent any time with the Temple Hillel?
I know some members of Temple Hillel. Right.
So Temple Hillel, they don't just do religious observation. They the Temple Hillel in particular, they hold up signs that are anti-Arab.
Like what? Sorry, can you provide an example of a sign?
One was like it was I don't remember. I don't want to give you a misquote, but I was there for it, so I can tell you it was something alluding to like the dying in virgins, and it was deep. It was like it was nakedly anti-Semitic. I'm sorry, anti-Islamophobic. And everyone agreed. It wasn't really one of those things that was in dispute. I think it was handled well. But I think that they are an activist organization. They protest. They stand inside of buildings with signs. They, before October 7th and certainly afterward, have advocated for, they don't use the word genocide, but I would. In Gaza, they certainly advocated and supported the mission in Gaza that I think is morally atrocious. So this idea, I think we have to be a little, and I can't speak to Hillels around the country. Each one, they're very different. But some are very activisty. So if you were to go to SJP on a Friday and protest them, I wouldn't say, yeah, but it's Juma, right? Because
that's different. Because if you went to, are you familiar with Students Supporting Israel? I would say it's the equivalent of Students for Justice in Palestine. If you went to an SSI event and started protesting, I'm sure. But can you not fundamentally understand that the supermajority of Jews view Zionism in Israel as an integral part of their religion? And just like I wouldn't superimpose my ideology of what Christianity or Islam should be to someone, shouldn't you? I feel like you can also admit that they shouldn't be superimposing their idea of what Judaism should be. So for Jews,
I disagree with that. I disagree with on both counts.
Really? So
yeah, I think, for example, if someone said we do female genital mutilation because it's Islamic law, I would say that's wrong, regardless of whether it's your religious faith or not. I would say that I'm going to superimpose my value on what you're calling your religious tradition. Absolutely.
But no one's advocating that.
No, they are. They literally are. That's literally happening. What'd you say?
Advocating what?
Female genital mutilation as a religious practice.
But I'm saying on a Shabbat dinner when Jews are just trying to go to Shabbat services.
But you just jumped. I'm saying to answer your question, your initial question. I'll answer your Shabbat question, right?
Yeah.
But you just said no one. You're saying that we should not superimpose our beliefs on or how people interpret their religious tradition. I'm saying the KKK, who you brought up, they that was rooted in Christianity. They were burning crosses on people's lawns, and they said that part of their Christian faith compelled them to do that. I would superimpose them and say you're doing Christianity wrong. And I think again, I know you don't like to step down on points, but I think there's another moment where you could say, you know what, maybe sometimes we do superimpose our beliefs on people's religions, because I damn sure would tell a KKK member that you're doing Christianity wrong. I would damn sure tell the person who is abusing women, harassing women, or mutilating women's bodies in the name of a faith that they're doing their religion wrong. Yes, I absolutely would do that. I would go to Uganda and say.
So are you saying to 80 to what was our agreement? I think it's 90%.
Wait, do you agree with what? Do you agree with what I just said?
Yeah, because that's harming other people. I'm saying that Jews.
Yeah, and I'm saying Zionism is harming other people. That's the argument.
So we can disagree, but
I'm just showing you the moral through line. I'm just showing you.
Are you saying that 90% of Jews are practicing their religion incorrectly then?
No, I'm saying that Zionism as a project is being. I'm saying Zionism as a political project, not as a religious ideal, is what I have an issue with. I have no issue with cultural Zionism. I have no issue with religious eschatology that's tied up in Zionism. What I have an issue with is a political ideology that results in the dispossession of millions of Palestinians. It results in the death of millions of people and the formation of a nation state, a government, a legal entity, a juridical body that causes harm. I have no issue with your religious beliefs or practices, except to the extent that they harm other people. And I'm speaking not about Judaism right now. I'm speaking about everybody. Yes, if someone said,
okay, but then following that logic, this goes back to what I'm saying. Following that logic, 90% of Jews then you fundamentally disagree with and think they're violent. And
no, I'm saying no, because I remember I started by saying that I think the way that Zionism, I think when I ask the average Jewish person what Zionism is, they don't say the formation of a violent ethno state that discriminates based on people's national or racial identity. I'm saying most Jews don't believe that. I don't think most Jews actually believe in the worst parts of political Zionism. I think that for most Jews, Zionism.
Most Jews support the state of Israel.
Yes, and yeah. I'm saying that if we were to do a critical analysis of this, just like another example, most Americans support America, right? But if I were to push, and when they say we support America's freedom and America as the leader of the free world, they're not saying we support imperialism. They're not saying we support the Bay of Pigs. They're not saying we support invading Iraq. We can make a distinction between what most people believe and what these things look like in practice. And if we don't do that, then what we would happen is, I'm not saying you're doing this, but it would suggest that the only way to respect Jewish people is to accept all of Israel's statecraft or the idea of Israel as an entity. And I'm saying all nation states are messy. All nation states are violent. There isn't one in the world that is not. All of them are. And I have a critique of all of them. And I'm not going to give one a pass because it's bound up sometimes in people's religious ideas. Just like I'm not going to give Saudi Arabia a pass just because because it has a specific.
Sure, but I'm saying, okay, let's go back to the original point. Or is this movement violent? And I think we just disagree then on the basics of violence. I think when a lot of SJP chapters are saying that they are part of Hamas, that they support Hamas.
I haven't seen a lot. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I haven't seen it. And if you can, what I'd like you to do, I'm not asking you on the spot, but if you could furnish that, I'd love to see that. And maybe we could have a different conversation. I haven't seen that. I've seen the examples you gave, which is like a handful. I haven't seen a lot. But I'm not saying you're wrong.
I can't send you every single one, but
no. I'm saying some evidence that this is
different. That Colombia SJP is a violent organization, or no?
I don't know enough about it to have an opinion on it. But what I can say is I'm answering your question again, because many of the things that you're calling violent, some of them I don't attribute to SJP. I'm not saying they're not SJP. I'm saying I don't know. I've seen too many times where, like, I was on you went to the encampments on Columbia, or at least you saw them, right? I know you went to the ones on Penn. There are tons of people. I think you would agree. And you know what? I don't want to make you do what I don't like to do, which is stipulate a number that you don't know. But I'll say this. Based on my observation on that campus, most people who were in the encampments were not members of SJP. And so I don't want to attribute the actions that happen, or the actions that happen on the encampment or in the encampment, to be SJP if I don't know that they're SJPers. That's all I'm saying.
I'm just saying, I feel like there's example after example of violent or calling for violence. Another example is an SJP organizer. This was reported by the New York Post, of a girl.
What campus was this?
Sorry?
What campus?
Columbia again.
You see what I mean?
No, because I think it's easier, because you're saying that you're not familiar with a bunch of different campuses, so then I can't bring up that argument.
No, you can't. You can bring up any campus you want. I don't have to know it to trust you. I'm just saying I'm going to research it.
I'm saying we'll focus on Columbia, right? Because then when I apply it to a broader sphere, you say, oh well, there's a national chapter that's disagreeing with.
No. All I'm saying to you is, I hear the same 3 or 4 campuses that you hear about or that you're mentioning. I don't want to make an assumption that because those 3 or 4 campuses are doing something in a particular way, that's representative of most or even a significant slice of the 150. And so I'm saying if there are other, and the more examples I get, they keep coming from Penn and Columbia, not just from you, but in general. So I'm saying I don't know if they're outliers.
I mean, I can give other examples. I mean, I can give UNC last week, or sorry, 3 weeks ago, taking over the ROTC building and graffitiing all over at Intifada. I can keep giving.
You see that as violent.
Sorry?
You see that as violent.
I think taking over an ROTC building and spray painting Intifada in it is violent.
Okay. And I think we have some fundamental disagreements about what might constitute violence. And even if we agreed on what constituted violence, then it might be that we have different ideas about what levels of violence are okay.
I think, and this poll was recently done, it was 87% of Jews on college campuses don't feel safe. I think if a poll was done of 87% of Black students not feeling safe and cited the exact movement that's making them feel unsafe, that you would call that a violent movement.
It would depend on what it was. I think if, I think power and privilege play an extraordinary role in how I think about unsafety.
What privilege does a Jewish student who pays just as much money as another?
I didn't say anything about Jewish students. I'm speaking. I made a claim. I'm making a claim about how I think about unsafety and how I think about the dynamics of unsafety. I was actually going to your example about Black people. That was actually where I was going with that. But again, I don't want to see it down. We don't have to go down another rabbit hole. I think to stay on the specific point you're making, I think I don't know if I would say that Jewish students have a power and privilege on college campuses. That wouldn't be what I'd say. That actually wasn't where I was going at all. But I think the discourse on Israel on college campuses is such that Palestinian liberation, Palestinian self-determination, and even Palestinian resistance are seen as inherently wrong. And so I think it creates a default position that the pro-Palestinian activist is going to be looked at with skepticism and maybe even scorn. And I think that creates a problem. I think when it comes to, for example, I think when we talk about even like, it's kind of like when white people in the country feel like they're losing the country, and, there's a way sometimes that those discourses speak to a certain kind of legitimate anxiety, but they're founded in things that aren't fair.
I don't think it has. I have to very much push back on that claim. I don't think it has anything to do with that whatsoever. I think when you have, for instance, at the Penn encampment, when you spoke, there was PFLP and Khamas flags being waved. The night before, it said Al Qassam. The entire encampment chanted Al Qassam, make us proud. Al Qassam is specifically militaristic. And can you at least understand how Jewish students would not feel comfortable with open praise for Hamas and the PFLP, or no?
Yeah, I can understand. I could understand how anybody who supports Israel would be uncomfortable with any mention of an organization that resists or challenges.
I think most students that even don't support Israel that would find it to be concerning or troubling that people are openly supporting two U.S. designated terrorist organizations.
Again, you and I disagree with the.
But universities are receiving money from the federal government. It doesn't matter whether we disagree. If you are receiving
but there's a legal argument and there's a moral argument, and I'm saying they don't always. You can't make the both at the same time, right? You can say they overlap, but I'm saying that sometimes the government gets it wrong. You would agree that
why not?
For example, Nelson Mandela was on the terrorist list, but you don't see it wrong to support him, right?
I think comparing Nelson Mandela to Khamas.
That's not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm doing.
You are. You bring it up as an analogy.
No. It's not analogous to Hamas. It's analogous. I'm talking about the terrorist list. I'm saying I'm making a case that the terrorist list isn't always accurate. Take Hamas off the table. To be clear,
Sure.
I'm not talking about Hamas right now.
Sure,
I'm saying, would you agree that sometimes it's okay to support that? Historically, there have been people on the U.S. terrorist list who actually shouldn't be.
I can't think of anyone other than Nelson Mandela, but yes.
Are you familiar with the U.S. terrorist list enough to be able to say anybody else than Nelson Mandela?
I'm saying I don't know of anyone other than Nelson Mandela.
Okay. No. What I'm saying is, right, but what one would heard then was he's the only one on the list that I think was wrongly placed. And what you're actually saying is, I don't know anyone else on the list. But I'm saying I don't want people to overestimate your familiarity with the list and think that Nelson Mandela was the outlier. I'm saying there are others that you're not familiar with because you're not that familiar with the list, which is cool. I'm not trying to pin you there. Let's just focus on Nelson Mandela. My point is, there were people in the 70s and 80s who would say at that time, why are you supporting the ANC? Why are you supporting Nelson Mandela? He's a terrorist. And they point to his placement on the list. So I'm just saying, I don't accept, even if it's the law, that just because someone's on a terrorist list, that they're inherently wrong. I don't conflate the law with ethics.
Because the
ANC.
ANC.
I'd rather focus on the actual groups and make a moral assessment of them on my own, because I don't trust the government to do so.
Sure. So I guess we're fundamental. But okay, so then let's go back. Do you? Because I think this would be an easy agree to disagree. Because to avoid us having to argue whether or not Hamas is a terrorist organization or
yeah, I don't think that's a useful conversation, right?
I'm saying, yeah, I think that's irrelevant. So I'm just saying, do you think that groups like Columbia SJP and Penn SJP, that a lot of the members do support Hamas and the PFLP?
I honestly don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if they did, but I don't know. I'd be guessing. I don't want to guess. It wouldn't shock me if they did, but I don't know. I sincerely don't know.
So what do you think they mean? For instance, Harvard specifically said that we are part of the SJP there. It goes by a different name, but it has the SJP logo on it. What do you think they mean when they say we are part of the resistance? What do you think they're referencing?
The resistance is a phrase used by almost every Palestinian liberation organization throughout history. Not even so. The resistance, I don't think, means one particular thing, and it certainly isn't exclusive to Hamas. Not even close.
So when it comes right after October 7th, and they say we do not condemn the actions of Hamas on October 7th, and we are part of the resistance. The brave resistance fighters of Hamas. You don't.
Oh, that's a different statement than just we support the resistance. You gave me a kind of broad the resistance. Now you're saying
they said what they actually said.
Okay, that's I'm just saying that there's a huge difference between we support the resistance and we support the brave resistance fighters of Hamas. That's a huge difference. If you're saying that's what they, let me find that.
I'm just saying that what is very interesting to me.
I'm saying if what you're saying is accurate, I'll have a different answer than if they didn't say that. That's what I'm saying. I'm not disagreeing with you.
I'm saying what's interesting to me is that you said Hillel, the Temple Hillel, has a history of being, whatever, pro. What was it again? I don't want to misquote you.
I'm saying the Hillel at Temple is a very activist group. They're not as distinct from the ISI. Is that right? What do you call it? Say it again.
SSI, student support.
They're not as distinct from the SSI as they might be on other campuses.
And then I'm saying that then you bring up one sign which was anti-Arab.
No, that's not what I said. That's not what I did. I said one sign was objectionable, but I'm saying if you take the objectionable sign off the table, I'm saying that they are actively they're doing the same thing that this SSI group you're describing would normally do. I'm saying they're not just a student life group on Temple campus. For example, they protested my office. They stood outside of my office and protested. Would you consider that a normal Hillel action?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're an activist group.
I don't. It's a Jewish organization that protests. I mean, they also have vigils for what. This is a moot point.
No, it's not a moot point. You framed it as they're civilians, right? They're outside the activist fray. This is just a Jewish group trying to honor Shabbat, and I'm saying no, they do a lot more than that.
But if they weren't having some sort of event or anything, then they were.
No, I'm saying they do have you're missing my point. I'm saying they do have events. They do have activist events on campus.
But they didn't protest an activist event. They just protested their Shabbat dinner.
Protesting a Shabbat dinner, I disagree with.
What does that mean? I feel like you have so much.
What do you want me to say?
I'm saying you have so much condemnation for like pro-Israel activity, but
like what? Give me an example.
Like what?
Well, give me an example where I had so much condemnation that's paling in comparison to this time.
I mean, I can start looking at past interviews, but
I thought you meant in this conversation. I'm sorry, I thought you meant in this conversation.
No. I'm saying in the past.
I'm saying I think I've been pretty level in saying like I condemn it. I mean, do you want me to march in this? I mean, I'm telling you, I think again, if you're protesting a Shabbat dinner and it's just a religious observance, I think that's wrong. I think that's 100% wrong.
I'm saying, what level do they need? What actions do they need to do where you will say that it's violent? Because I think bringing up what happened.
I don't think that you. Here's the thing. I don't think violence is the only way to just be wrong. For example, if I stood in front of your synagogue and I don't know, and you didn't have a particularly political position, right? It's just a synagogue and people are worshiping, and I'm just protesting it because you're Jewish. Even if I never say a word, even if I never lay a finger on you, even if I don't break a window, I still think that that's deeply harmful. And I don't think it's less harmful than breaking a window. I'm saying it's all wrong. I'm not afraid to just what's the word? To criticize or condemn is what I was looking. I'm not unwilling to condemn that. It doesn't need to be violent for me to condemn it. My moral barometer isn't as tied to violence as yours is, it seems like. I'm willing to say this is wrong even if there's no violence. And I'm willing to say this isn't necessarily wrong just because there's violence. You know what I mean? I think we have to look at things in a more nuanced way. And the reason I brought up the Hillel was not to say that somehow they deserve it. I'm just saying that, again, you didn't give me the full context. I'm saying protesting an activist group for its actions as activists is not the same thing as protesting a group that's just doing religious observance. If they're just doing religious observance, I agree with you. I'm just saying, based on my personal experience with Hillel on campuses, that's not what they do. And I've seen them.
Yeah,
but if that's what happened here, then you're right. I don't disagree with you.
I'm saying that I think when on many college campuses during the encampments, when you had terrorist flags of the PFLP, Khamas, Hezbollah, and no one stopped them from being waved or present on SJP encampments, that I would argue that those encampments are promoting Hamas, Hezbollah, and the PFLP.
Let me ask you a question. What Palestinian resistance groups do you think are legitimate?
Currently, I would say the Palestinian Authority, if they stopped the pay for slay.
The Palestinian Authority is not a resistance group. It's a government. What Palestinian resistance organizations do you support?
And this goes back to our original argument. I think every Palestinian group has been wedded to the idea of the destruction of Israel and not to an actual establishment of a national homeland for themselves.
So you don't agree. So basically, you don't agree with any Palestinian resistance organization. So I mean, again, that's a. I'm not saying that you're. That's not logically.
This is a separate argument where we can argue.
No, what I'm saying is it's harder for me to accept your position because I don't think you. What I find in general, not you. I'm not talking about you. Yeah, I'm saying in general is I have yet to find any defender of Israel that really finds any form of Palestinian resistance or any organized Palestinian resistance to be legitimate. Even if they're just marching
so far as targeted civilians, I can't.
Even when they're just marching through campus saying "Free Palestine from the river to the sea," they're like, "Nope, that's violent. Get them off the campus."
I don't actually think that's fundamentally untrue.
What's untrue?
You saying people just marching down campus chanting "from the river to the sea," people like that's what's happening. That's just not the reality.
No, that's not what I just said. I said even just that itself, that act itself, has been deemed hostile and inappropriate for the campus. I'm not saying that's all people do. I'm saying even if they just did that, it would be deemed as inappropriate in an unsafe environment. Is that not true? Would you agree with that part?
I don't think people have been calling to throw people off campus for simply doing that. No.
Okay, so and I know you looked at the congressional hearings.
I was there. I testified.
It was that's what I'm saying. I know you were there. I watched your testimony. In fact, it's pinned to your Twitter. Everybody, you should go check it out. River to the Sea was the basis for many. The chants of genocide that people were talking about, as you know, was often the Free Palestine from the River to the Sea chant. That was seen as a call for genocide. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Right. And they said that calls for genocide. I mean, literally, Claudine Gay and your president, or former president, at Penn were condemned for not condemning. They said, like, even if people call for genocide, you're not going to condemn this. They were talking about the River to the Sea chant. So yes, the river.
I was there. At least I mean, this is so irrelevant to our conversation. But what happened was Lee Stefanik point blank said, just calling for the genocide of Jews violate the code of conduct. Kornbluth from MIT refused to answer, and then Liz McGill, then Claudine Gay, and repeatedly she said, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate the code of conduct? Nowhere during that entire line of questioning was from the River to the Sea brought up.
No,
it was brought up on other questions.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Remember, I just said that the calling for genocide was the conversation, but river to the sea is what people are equating with the call for genocide. Whenever
I'm not talking, but I don't care what other people are saying. I'm talking about what
I'm saying what I'm saying. I'm not making a point for you. I'm making a point for me.
Yeah.
I'm saying that when students are when students are all right, because this feels a little bad faith. Would you agree that when people on your side of who have your position, they consider river to the sea as a call for genocide? You'd agree with that, right?
I consider from the river to the sea a call for genocide.
Okay, so that's all I'm saying. So what I'm saying is
that's not what I'm referencing.
I know you're not. I made a claim, not you. I'm making a claim. My claim is that even if students were to just march through campus chanting river to the sea, it would be deemed as inappropriate because it would be deemed a call for genocide. That's all I said.
Okay.
And you agree with that, right?
No, I don't think that's happening because kids have been doing it for 1.5 years and nothing's happening.
All right, you didn't hear what I just said. And this is the last time I'll say it. It would be, I said, people consider, I'm saying, people on your side of the aisle are calling.
Yes, people do consider it. People do.
Yes. So my point is, even if there's no violence and people are just making a chant, that would still be deemed by people on your side of the aisle as inappropriate. Yes. That's what I said.
Yes.
Okay. Our last 7 minutes was you disagreeing with that. So, okay. So now we're on the same page. So my point is, at some point, it feels as if there is nothing, if there's no organization that's legitimate as of now. I'm not saying ever, but you're saying right now there's no organization, no national movement that's appropriate. And even basic free speech that is devoid of any physical act of violence, all of it is still not good. It still seems unacceptable. It seems to me that on college campuses, Palestinian resistance writ large, or as such, it probably better put, Palestinian resistance as such is viewed as illegitimate and wrong. And son of a bitch. I'm sorry, that's not to you at all. I did something really stupid and I'm very frustrated by it.
No, you're all good.
Like something really dumb on my computer. My God, I'm an idiot. It's okay. It doesn't matter. I fixed it. I almost deleted our whole exchange. That's what I was worried about. Anyway, it's all good.
I fundamentally think that if you support that these groups support Hamas, Hezbollah, and the PFLP, if do you disagree with that or agree with that? We can disagree on whether those groups.
What was the question again? Say the question again, and then I have to run. What's the question?
Do you think that many SJP chapters, such as the one that I mentioned, do support Hamas, Hezbollah, and the PFLP?
As like the organizational position?
As the chapter, the members.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I don't know. I'm open to the possibility that's true. I just don't know, and I just don't want to make a claim that I can't support. I don't know. You might be right. I don't know.
Okay, I mean, yeah. Then I guess there's not really anything to argue on.
No, I mean, some people just get on TV or on platforms and just make claims without proof. I'm saying I don't know, and I'm comfortable saying when I don't know something. I don't know.
Yeah, no. When we discussed this, though, the conversation was about whether they're violent or not. So I assume that that's what we would discuss. But it seems like
whether they're violent or not whether whether specific chapters supported specific organizations. We never said we would discuss that. And that's an empirical question, and I have no way. How would how can I study that? How can I know? How can I figure that out? It would take. I'm not saying it's unfigure outable, but that's like an actual project, and it's not a project that I'm engaged in. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. See, I don't know. But I mean,
fair enough.
Fair enough. All right, my friend. Thanks for this conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and best of luck. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Have a good one.
All right. We good, y'all. Everything is good with oh man, y'all funny. Oh, it was absolutely worth my sleep. I love the conversations. I love to have dialogue. I love to share. I love to engage. I love to learn. And I honestly, I honestly think that that these conversations are helpful. I think he's a seems like a nice guy. Seems sincere. I don't mean to be patronizing. I think he's sincere, and I think he's a nice guy. And I think he's genuinely concerned with the issues that he's raising. Some people are dishonest. Some people are disingenuous. I don't think he was. I think he's sincere. I think we just see the world differently. And I'm happy to have those dialogues from time to time. I can't do this every day because it's draining on my spirit. I just heard Bullet the Bunny say he is not a nice guy. You know what? I don't want to say he's not a nice guy. I'll just say, I mean, he was nice to me. He's nice and interpersonally. You know, he supports policies and politics that I don't, and I find that problematic, obviously. But I'm not going to. Yeah, he's still he's a nice guy, and I think that we have a tendency in these debates on TV, because they're 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, to kind of talk past each other, or just say things that aren't true, or speak in general terms. And I think the whole point of these platforms, we've been on for 3 hours, we've been talking for 2 hours and 50 minutes. I think the whole point of these spaces is that we don't have to do that. The whole point of these spaces is to be able to press each other and say, well, how do you know that? Or where are we getting this from? So, for example, when he says, you know, the majority of SJPs are X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, well, what do we? The majority of SJPs have been suspended, I think was the claim. Where's the proof of that? I don't think that's true. It's not just, I'm not trying to nitpick. If the number were like 60 or 70 out of 150, which isn't most, I wouldn't be like, aha, it's not most, it's only 60. But what if it's like 10? What if it's like 12? That would be a ridiculous claim to make. I'm not saying it is 10 or 12. I'm saying I don't know. He made the claim. Prove the claim. If you don't have proof, don't make the claim. And, you know, he has a tendency to say things that aren't true or that are factually inaccurate. And then when he's asked to substantiate his claim, he makes it seem as if I'm nitpicking. So, you know, it's a strange thing sometimes when that happens. So I didn't understand a little bit why that was happening, but it's all good. If you've never counted the number of SJPs, or you don't have evidence of it, or you can name 10 that have been suspended, that doesn't mean that 65 more exist. And then you said, and then he said, I've never counted them. So you have no idea. You're just making that up. And and it's over and over and over again. You know, the 3 no's. I wouldn't care that he said the 5 no's. I mean, there's no one who knows Middle East history that would call it the 5 no's, but I didn't care that he said the 5 no's. I more cared about how he represented the no's. I think he was fundamentally wrong, not just superficially wrong. And that's what office hours is. Maybe he didn't understand the office hours platform. I want to be fair to him. Maybe he didn't understand that the point is the minutia. This isn't a cable news interview. This is the minutia. This is the nuts and bolts. This is the fundamental debates and arguments. And if you're not willing to have those, then what are we here for? You know, I took a lot of notes as he talked. And there were just so many things that were just like, wow, this isn't true. This isn't true. But anyway, I don't want to belabor the point. I thought that this was fascinating. Let me see. We got some comments coming. I want to take them before we go real fast, y'all. And some of these already came up. I appreciate y'all putting up the challenge. Appreciate you, Bullet the Bunny. I mean, even the Arafat stuff, which is how we started, right? It's like, okay, um, he says he's read the biographies of Arafat, which I don't believe. But if he's actually read the biographies of Arafat, even the ones in English, um, I don't get how he would make the claim that he was Egyptian as an identity. Said he was a Husseini. Husseinis are a very particular thing in Jerusalem. They were Jerusalemites. Um, and the Jerusalemite identity, the Maqdisi identity, was so much more important. He says that, Palestine is a legitimate national identity now, but it wasn't before, because before it was about the destruction of the Jewish state. Well, by his argument, Hamas and the PLO have still been committed to the destruction of the Jewish state. So how is that different? Then he says, well, it's language. Okay, well, how's the language different? Well, back then, there was no Palestinian Arabic. It was the same everywhere. It was no different than the Syrian or the Lebanese or the Jordanian dialect. How's it different now? Right? How's it different now? He doesn't know because he doesn't speak the language. But not just you don't have to speak the language to make a claim. I just don't know what's anyway. Not to get into the weeds of it again, but he was just saying things. And when you echo talking points that you don't know, it gets really challenging. It gets really challenging. I want to shout out Chad Zichterman, who gifted 50 memberships tonight. I'm so grateful, yo. We've been having some lean weeks and lean months, so here on the channel. So even just the donation itself is much appreciated. But it's even more appreciated when we outside doing this work. I mean, I just spent 3 hours here having an incredibly interesting, I think, provocative conversation with Eyal. And I'm so glad we had the conversation. I really do appreciate Eyal for spending his time. I know he has a lot to do. He works during the day. I'm sure he has better things to do than to argue with a middle-aged professor. But I appreciate him taking the time. But I appreciate y'all watching. And Chad, this donation is incredibly generous, and I appreciate it. I appreciate Bullet raising the bar here. I appreciate M.L. McKinney for becoming a member. Rose ability for the nitty and the gritty. I got that and appreciated that. Karen D said, I don't think you need to go back to school and take debate 101, understand facts versus opinions, understand what the word violence means, read and listen. Bill Williams said, this is your platform. The level of tolerance here is wild. This guy's just being disrespectful and interrupting. I mean, we interrupted each other. I wouldn't, I interrupted him. And again, I don't mind interruptions for clarity. It seemed to me sometimes his interruptions led to a redirection of the whole conversation. And he was very interested in saying repeatedly sort of what we're talking about right now doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It seemed like every point we were on, he found irrelevant. So, I'm not sure what he thought was the most relevant, but I hope we got to some of it because again, I appreciated his presence here. Gatian Dolphin in Zowo said the UN recognizes, quote, the right of peoples to self-determination, struggle by all available means. Yes, within the bounds of international law. Obviously, you can't like drop a nuclear bomb on people, but yes, people do have a right to resist. They absolutely have a right to resist and to struggle for liberation. You're absolutely right, my brother. Thank you for that. You watch this back later and learn something. If you care more about facts and winning, you can make the most of this education. Yeah, agreed. And I'm going to go back and watch it again too, because I'm sure there are places where I could learn. D'Angelo Trewick said, resistance will always be criticized and never the underlying causes. Exactly. Yes, this is a great point. The Israeli Likud party established a decade before the creation of Hamas opposed the establishment of any Palestinian state from the river to the sea. Samira, why is the combo always about anti-Semitism? Muslims are the ones being massacred by millions. This is sick. He's talking about a chart when they're actually slaughtering Muslims. Stop. Karen D said Bob Warren just had a good idea. Office hours now, the nitty gritty. Y'all so silly. Y'all so silly. I love y'all though. He's a monster. Talk about words meaning they killing 20,000 babies. Stop pacifying his feelings when he's advocating for a Holocaust. This is the issue. Yeah, I don't want to manipulate the combo, but I also I know it's hard to believe, y'all. This is my real personality. I know some of y'all don't like it, and I don't mean that like sarcastically or like self-deprecating. I mean like I know some of y'all want me to come with the fire and be more aggressive and all of that stuff. It's not who I am. This is my approach. I'm a teacher, and I'm a conversationalist. And I much rather engage people Socratically than the kind of, I don't know if that gets us very far. I don't know if it gets us very far. Samir said, these monsters will age you. Yo, I do feel like I got, y'all see these gray hairs? I got some new ones tonight. I'll be like Obama at the end of his first term, messing with them. And by them, I mean the debate partners. You know, every week I debate somebody. It feels like and my hair gets grayer and grayer. Simply Shawnee, what the whoop. Let's see. I hear you, Samir. I do. It's a balancing act for me of not wanting to platform people who are harmful, but also wanting to give voice to people who have a different opinion, and we can figure this thing out together. Janana said, thank you, Prof. Lich Dash said, thank you. See, now Kevin Danishevsky starts off nice, and then this is what they do, right? You act like a Knicks fan. You must be a New Yorker. Yep. See, I see the hashtag Go New York. I didn't even have to see it to know you were a Knicks fan. He says you're brilliant, love progressive except for Palestine. The book is except for Palestine. I appreciate the shout out. But I have one important message for you. Sixers suck it and beat is only a New York cockroach would do something like that. Doctor, when you talk about how the arguments don't considerably improve, even when the pro-Zionist argues with fellow PhDs argue, I mean, honestly, you know, yeah, I mean, the arguments are the arguments, right? Certainly Benny Morris, who's brilliant, far more learned than me on this subject, makes a more nuanced, sophisticated argument. But ultimately, the argument is the argument. And I think it's not a persuasive one. The facts just aren't on his side. Thank you, Janana. Do my best. I'm doing my best to make the argument. I debate. I mean, now, just for clarity's sake, he challenged me to a debate. I followed up when this Yasser Arafat exchange happened, but months ago, his point was, you know, you're debating these people. You need to be on, you know, talk to people on the ground. And he made other claims too, and other people did too. And I think, you know, I like to give people an opportunity to make their case, you know? I like to give people an opportunity to talk through their stuff. But I didn't go looking for him. You know, he reached out to me. I didn't know who he was. He reached out to me. So just understand, people be asking for the smoke. As to quote a great philosopher, Sean Carter, I ain't got it to give, but I got it to test. Oh man, he gonna be all right. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. What? Briz and cheese. Tell me what he didn't do. Briz and cheese. What am I lying about? If I'm lying, maybe if I'm saying something mistaken, tell me. I'm not lying, but if I'm wrong about something, let me know. Are you saying that he didn't call me to be he? I don't mean literally call. I mean he didn't reach out to me about being on the platform, because that's my I don't know. He offered himself to debate. Is that not right? Am I missing something? Where are you, Brick and Cheese? Let's see. Maybe they'll respond. Brick and Cheese, brother. Oh, you mean I'm lying like sarcastically? Like I thought you were saying like. I thought you meant it like. I'm sorry, I'm a little on edge. I thought you know I get so many. I get it now. You mean like you saying it like black? Like no, you didn't. You lied. See, tone means everything. That's why it's important to see. I was about to lose my shit. Yeah, no. He definitely asked for the smoke. He definitely reached out. Our exchange, and I'm gonna leave y'all alone. Our exchange started with him. This is how our exchange started. How did it go? How it start? How it started? How it's going? Yeah, he reached out to me. This is June 10th. Right. So his argument fundamentally was, I just find like randos to debate. I didn't even know what he was talking about. Yeah, and I never claimed that I took that all. I debated somebody. Yeah, and again, he said there are many times you made reference to what the guest said, and you say this is common among Zionists. Yeah, because Zionists often give the same talking points, just like anti-Zionists often give the same talking points. That's what happens in political debates. People give their points. And so ultimately, as you can see, and you can read this for yourself, it's public information. But he said, I would debate me whether the encampment is peaceful. So that's how it started. Then over the subsequent months, more things happened on campus. And then the Arafat thing happened. And then he said he wanted to debate me on that. And now in fairness, he just told me I was wrong. And I said, well, I'm happy to debate this with you. And I said, let's mix it all together. And that's how we ended up. So he jumped up for this. As you say back in my day, he jumped up to get beat down. Not physically, to be clear. It's a rap song. So anyway, yeah, man, people do what they do. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to have the dialogue. Eyal Yakoby, thank you for your continued commitment to dialogue. I'm glad that you dialogued with me. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to do it again on your platform. You can come back here. You have an open open door here. Not every night, obviously, but anytime there's an issue you want to talk or debate, we can stipulate a more narrow set of topics or maybe a single topic and then just go at it. If you want an interlocutor, if you want a moderator, I'm happy with that too. I'll do whatever you want. I love the conversation. So thank y'all, man. I appreciate y'all. Do y'all want to do a live Q&A real quick? We're gonna do a live Q&A on a different thingamajiggy, not here. It's funny. AK asked me, it's funny when I do like a normal. Normally I get tired this time of night, but debates get me pumped up. Y'all say go to sleep. Okay, Bob said go to sleep. I'm gonna go to sleep then. Maybe we'll do. Yeah, we've been up for 3 hours. You know what? Maybe we'll do it tomorrow then. Let's do it maybe tomorrow. Mark, and it's funny because I ain't had nothing but this. Well, I do need to wake up early and do some writing, finish an essay. So you know what? Let me not get too confident. I'll see y'all later, everybody. Thanks for watching Office Hours. This has been one of the best office hours we've ever had. I made all these little banners and stuff. I didn't even get a chance to put them up, but we'll do what we can. شكرا لك يا صديقي أخك من فلسطين حبيبي. I appreciate you. Yeah, I ain't had time to hit no buttons or nothing, man. Thank y'all for hitting the like button. If you didn't hit the like button, hit the like button now. Hit the subscribe button. And family, if you're here for the first time, hit the join button. Hit the join button and become part of the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel family. It's how we pay the bills. It's how we do all the programming that we do, the podcast with Mumia, the Coffee and Books. It's how we do night school every night. It's how we do office hours. I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to all of you for making it happen. Thank you. Thank you. 1,000 thank yous. I'm so grateful to you all. I really appreciate all the love, all the support. If you can, if you can't hit the join button, I am going to make a request again. You know, I'll be out here work. I didn't even monetize this interview. Like, I literally didn't make a nickel off of it. Everything's not about money. It's about the dialogue. But we need money. It's how the channel goes. It's how I pay the staff. It's how I edit. It's how I promote. It's how I get the stuff out. Go to Cash App, go to PayPal, go to Venmo, go to Zelle. If you could drop something in, if everybody watching right now were to drop $10, we would meet all of our financial goals for the month. If you can't give $10, it's fine. If you give $1, I'm grateful. If you give $1, I'm grateful. If you give $10, $100, $1 million, I'm grateful. But if everybody watching gave $10 right now, we would meet all of our financial goals, whether it's Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle. All of it's great. I love Cash App, obviously, and Venmo. Those are my two favorites. But whatever works, y'all. We could use the support. If you're sending super chats and all that stuff, I'm grateful for that too. It all is much appreciated. Samira, thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. And Kara Rash, thank you so much. I'm so grateful, y'all. I can't even tell you how much I love and appreciate and support, and I'm grateful for the support you offer. AK just dropped a super sticker, yo. Thank you so much. We got a lot of Canada in the crib tonight. I appreciate that for real. Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Oh, wait a minute. Sagittarius, you know I'm a Sag too. I love it. 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 More, why do you like Cash App and Venmo and Zelle's free more? You know what? Zelle is good too. You know what it is? I'm just used to going to Cash App. I'm just an old man who has who's set in his ways. That's all. Zelle makes a lot more sense. You're right. Zelle is free and it's more reliable. Y'all send that Zelle. Send whatever y'all want. But if everybody watching right now, whether you're on Twitter, whether you're on YouTube, whatever, were to drop $10, we would meet our financial goals for the month. If you drop it on YouTube, that's great too. Femi, thank you. I appreciate y'all. And by the way, last thought. Yeah, yo, that's funny. That's mad funny. We may have to ask Princess to do that. And thank you, Jack. I appreciate you for appreciating it. I don't debate people like Eyal or Alan Dershowitz or whoever, right? You know, whoever the person is. I don't debate them to convince them that I'm right and they're wrong. I don't debate them for any kind of with any kind of expectation of a conversion experience, you know. I debate them for the audience. This is why I know we thought I was nitpicking. It's like, yeah, I don't want y'all writing down the 5 no's. I don't want y'all thinking that Hamas charter was founded in 1980. It wasn't. And that's why, you know, what he did was, there are many times where I was telling him he was wrong and he would say that I'm wrong, that he would disagree with me, and then he would Google it, and then he would stop talking about it, change the subject, and say this is irrelevant. It was irrelevant to him because he didn't know what he was talking about, and he was disproven. He just doesn't know a lot about a lot of the historical stuff. That doesn't mean that he's wrong just because he doesn't know the historical stuff. He could be right and I could be wrong about the broader argument. I know he wanted to get to the broader argument, but so much of his broader argument was anchored in facts that weren't in fact the case. And so for me, that was the point. But all that to say, I debate people like him or political conservatives or whatever the issue might be. It could be music, whatever. I debate people who I disagree with strongly. so that the audience can see it. I'm trying to persuade people who are watching who don't know any better, or I'm trying to give the people who do know better tools and tactics for making their case better. And when I look in the comments, some of y'all sometimes do things that teach me how to engage differently. Thank you, Shahed Shifazan. Thank you so much for your support. And people go on CNN and other shows, it's just people using talking points in neutral conversation. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, and I think that's how people can start to traffic in talking points that aren't legitimate. I think it's how people continuously advance an argument that's not built on something strong. Because we just say things. We just say things, and then it's like, well, where's your proof of that? Like, I'm sure he's going all around the country saying, on different platforms, saying the majority of most SJPs have been kicked off of campus. And again, maybe they have. I don't think that's the case, but you got to have proof when you say it, right? Otherwise, I can't assume that it's true. But if you say it enough, it becomes true. And the problem with cable news is that no one ever challenges people. And because there's just enough time to get your point and go, you don't actually have to have any expertise. You don't actually have to be a student of this stuff. And that's the point. I appreciate the open debate too. Look, Bohan, I appreciate more than you know. That's why I'm grateful. Anyway, I don't want to keep you all up too long. Again, feel free to drop something in Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle, whichever one works for you. I'm grateful for all of it. Frankly, I'm grateful for all of it. Pops that I gave you. I guess we're not going to bed. No, we're going to bed. I'm going to eat my dinner, which I was supposed to eat 3 hours ago. By the way, my wife texted me at maybe 2 hours ago. Like, why are you yelling? Is everything okay? I was like, yeah, it was just a spirited debate. That's a polite way of saying shut your pie hole, Mark. And look, I'm here for it. I ain't mad at that. My pie hole needed to be shut. I was yelling. At some point, we got so heated. We weren't angry at each other, Eyal and I, but we were raising our voices. So I had to modulate, which is good. It was also very good. Karen says, I love this wide awake. Well, yeah, don't get used to it, Karen. You know my ass be sleepy this time of night in the middle of a sentence. Thank you so much, Black Brew. I'm so grateful. Again, everybody. Anybody who knows me knows how rare this is. I don't know what's going on. What a crazy world. Jack Zoo, new member. Thank you so much for joining. Zhao, excuse me. Thank you so much for joining the channel. I appreciate you. I appreciate you more than you know. Man, we getting somewhere. Exactly. AK, you already know. My ass, I don't pretend I don't even pretend that I don't be dozing off. I just be like, look, at this point, I've dozed. I'm gonna usually when I start dozing to the point that I know I'm dozing, I'll be like, all right, I'm gonna just leave. Because at some point it becomes embarrassing. I don't know. Anyway, let me go, y'all. I need to eat and rest and do all those self-care things that people talked about. I appreciate y'all, but make sure y'all watch Night School tomorrow night and every night on the channel. Tomorrow night's gonna be a late one. I'm actually in Philadelphia interviewing Mike Africa about his new book, so I'll have to. We're gonna do it late. We're gonna do it super late, but we will do something. Maybe tomorrow night we might just do live Q&A. That might actually be a way to do it. Anyway, I love y'all more than y'all know, man. Alex, thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity. Karen, yo, see, we kindred spirit. We both up, not eating. You ain't got no excuse because you could eat and watch this. I couldn't. Chad, thanks again. I shout out to you. I appreciate you. Like Brew, thank you. Appreciate you, family. All right, y'all. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Peace.